And ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution is not going to get that man today. No, because I'm going to get him.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to a very special Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Today is Friday. Thankfully, it's Friday. It's February 22nd, 2013. This is a live broadcast. My name is Doug Hagmann. With me is my son, my co-host, Joe Hagmann, and together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report investigator on Investigator Father and Son team, the only one, to my knowledge, on the radio and on the internet. And I just want to say that we are thankful. We are very thankful for everyone joining us. We appreciate your support, whether it's through prayer, spreading the word about the broadcast, helping us stay on the air financially. We appreciate all of you all of the time. With that, I just want to say hello to Joe. Welcome to the studio, Joe. Good to see you.
I don't know. Can you hear me?
I can't hear you at all.
Or I was muted. Now the audience should be able to hear me.
Hey, you're doing what I used to do.
How is my sound? Because you said I was muffled or something was going on.
Yeah, still a little bit on the muffled.
Yeah, I was
side.
Listening as I was uploading some audio for the show tonight. I was noticing the YouTube videos I was playing were very staticky. And I don't know if it's this headset, which is new, only a month or so old. I don't know, but if you
want to try a hard restart on that whole system, you might want to do that.
Okay.
But at any rate, folks, here's our program platform for tonight. I got to tell you, we have a good show tonight. 8:30. I don't know whether anyone. Boy, if you haven't heard of Risa Kirkland. She's known as War Chick on the internet. Now, don't let that name fool you or have any preconceived notions of this. You know, she's not a neocon, some sort of war drum beating person. That's just her internet name, and she's got a terrific story to tell.
Yeah, I had a nice conversation with her before the show. And she told me that was Korean veterans gave her that nickname. And she is a very intelligent woman, and it's going to be a great show tonight.
Yeah, I've talked to her before. This is going to be, initially she's going to come on and tell the story of Private First Class Ricardo Carrasco. And then from there, we're going to go into areas that are topical for the news as it is today. Folks, a lot of news. You know, where do you start? And we had kind of a rough week. I think in news wise and just everything. I'm glad it's Friday. We'll get a chance this weekend to continue with our website work, but I'm just wondering what everyone out there thinks is perhaps the most important news story of the week, given all of the news stories that we've seen and gone through. Some things we're following, of course, is the DHS ordering of targets and of ammunition, of course, the domestic unrest, the economic shadowing of our country. I just right now there are stories out there, and Joe, I don't know whether you saw this or not. An article supposedly appeared, and I didn't really follow this down, in one of the newspapers, a small newspaper, I believe, in South Carolina. It was a report about the 26th Marine Expeditionary Unit training within the town limits in Jasper County, South Carolina. And it struck me as just a little bit odd. You know, we are seeing right now military training in urban areas. What are they preparing for? We're seeing the hardening of DHS. Of course, our feeling is they're preparing, and we go through this a lot, and it seems like we're rehashing this. But I really think, Joe, that we've got to be very much on the edge of this, because what could be a drill could turn into a real world exercise. I'm not saying it will, but we've got a lot of possibilities coming up. Civil unrest with respect to the economy, I really believe that's going to be the trigger here. I think the economy is teetering on the brink of. I mean, it's just teetering. I think we really have run our limits with respect to the economy. Now, I'm working on too, and Joe, and both Joe and I, but I'm working on an article about the Federal Reserve. This should win me a lot of friends and people close to me, and about how it kind of came into creation. Not too much on the historical side. Many people have documented the history of the Fed. Of course, The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin, and then of course we have Secrets of the Federal Reserve by Eustace Mullins. And between those two books, people can get a great picture, an accurate picture of the history of how it all came about. But it's interesting how history has revised or been revised. If you look at history books, what was the War of 1812 all about? Well, it was about money. It was about the Federal Reserve. And we could go on and on, but a lot of people, history has been revised to the point it's not true. It's fulfilling an agenda. And if you go back into the history of the Federal Reserve through today, you want to know who the architects of our financial demise are. Well, that's something that we could trace it right back to the Federal Reserve.
One of the things that you asked was what is one of the biggest news stories, and what we're seeing, the sequestering rhetoric, this back and forth between Obama blaming the Congress for the sequestering and for the cuts that are coming. And we have an audio clip that we're going to play for you to show you what the truth is. Obama is the one who actually ordered the sequestering or had it implemented. Yep. And what I heard on Sean Hannity today was when I was driving to the studio, he was talking about, all the mainstream media is compromised, except Fox News, of course. And nobody's getting to the heart of the matter, the truth of what's really bringing down the economy, and that is Barack Obama. No mention of the Federal Reserve, no mention of quantitative easing, of manipulation of markets, of industry, of any of that. Lay the blame solely on the feet of Obama, and continues to go into that left-right paradigm, and leading people on that there is some kind of political solution to all this.
Well, there would be if the Federal Reserve was done away with, and I think that history shows adequately that no one is going to do away with the Federal Reserve short of a revolt. It's an amazing, folks, if you really don't, and I know most of our listeners understand the Federal Reserve, understand the Fed probably better than anyone else listening to any other talk show, but their role in what's taking place today, the Ben Bernanke's of the world, the Tim Geithners of the world, and you can trace back to Herman Cain too. People think, well, Herman Cain was such a great guy. Well, don't forget his role in the Fed. Larry Summers, Timothy Geithner. Do these names sound familiar? We've actually put the fox in charge of the chicken coop. I mean, this is what we've done. We've got the entire global monetary supply, the entire global monetary economic system is based on nothing more than a criminal cartel of centralized banks. And I know that people know this, but it's good to it's good to kind of point out and say, look, this is exactly what's going on. So if you want to play that clip as a basis for the rest of this discussion right now, if you have it handy, go ahead and just take a listen to this.
Yeah, this is from Greta, a quick clip from Greta Van Susteren. I think it was something that she did in a show, but she opens and then it goes into the back and forth of Obama flip-flopping and the rhetoric for people around him. It's only a minute and 28 seconds, so here it is.
All right. Anyways.
Tonight, here's a tip. If you are reckless enough to create a crisis for the nation, you had better know how to fix it.
Whose idea was the sequester, and did you ever think that we'd actually get to this point?
First of all, it was the White House.
First of all, the sequester's not something that I propose. It's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen.
Everyone should be clear that sequestration is a Republican policy, and it is a bad policy.
Well, all I can say is the commander-in-chief came up with the idea of sequestration.
The president's part of the sequester. The White House recommended it, frankly.
It was requested by the president. It was his idea, signed into law by him.
First of all, the sequester's not something that I propose. It's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen.
The sequester was the president's idea.
Didn't the idea for the sequester originate here at the White House?
The sequester was something that was discussed, and as has been reported, it was an idea that the White House put forward.
Well, first of all, it was the president's idea when this sequester was proposed to be put into law a couple of years ago.
First of all, the sequester's not something that I propose. It's something that Congress has proposed. It will not happen.
What I will concede is that we were looking, and the Republicans were looking for a trigger around which to build the mechanism to get us out of default possibility. Right. And the sequester was one of the ideas put forward, yes, by the president's team.
So there you have it, in Obama's own words. He did not order the sequester, and he did.
No one did.
But today, even Jay Carney's denying it in press briefings, so whatever.
Well, it's really what this is all about is
passing the buck.
The Hegelian dialectic too, or as well, I should say. I mean, this is a perfect example of it. But the
normalization of a humongous deficit. I mean, we have a normalcy bias now to accept additional trillions of dollars added to our deficit with no outcry from the people. It's normal now to have a multi-trillion-dollar deficit.
And and folks, this is the reason why, and I believe this is why it's so important for me. I am working on really kind of a series of articles, but on the creation of the Fed, why it was created, what happened in the War of 1812, what was Andrew Jackson's role way back when on with the creation of the central banks. And
who are these mysterious creatures from Jekyll Island?
Well, I think I might have one lurking in my garage. But let me tell you something. This is to me, this is what causes wars, or this is why wars are fought. I shouldn't say causes. This is why wars are fought. Because really, let me ask a question here, and think about this. This is a kind of a rhetorical question, I suppose. Ask yourself a question. If the Federal Reserve can print all of the money they need, print it out of thin air, if these people have a license to print the money, then why? Let me ask you, why do we have an income tax?
That made me think today.
Think about that, ladies and gentlemen.
You asked me that. And
think about that.
And my response was power. And but there's an additional answer.
Right, and I'm going to be talking about this in my article, but just to give you, just not to leave you hanging here, obviously, the income tax system was created for two reasons. A centralized control of the people. That's reason number one. All right? Think about that. And the second part is a way to control the volume of money. Now,
not only that,
deeper.
to siphon the money out of what was left of the middle class, to control the supply and demand chain of money, like you said, the amount of actual physical currency that is circulating.
Right.
Because they are printing $85 billion a month. They've been doing this for months. They've been doing this through QE2, QE1, different amounts.
Oh, yeah.
Where obviously you'd think we'd see this money flooding the market, this influx of cash everywhere. But we're not. Why? Because they are controlling how it is released. And if they wanted to, they could just dump a whole bunch, throw it into the population, and the value of the dollar would plummet. What's left of the value of the dollar?
Well, right. Another way of saying it would be hyperinflation, because you get too much money out there, it would cause hyperinflation. So what the income tax system does, aside from centralizing the control over everyone, it also siphons off the money from you. It's kind of a way of keeping you under the thumb of the bankers, the central bankers. Now, why in the world would we even talk about this right now? Because with everything going on in the news, why talk about this now? Because this will help you understand. It's my belief it's going to help you understand, because I'm looking for, I'm trying to understand myself, just an average guy trying to understand, well, what's going on with the markets, what's going on with the economy, when, how, how is it possible that the stock market's up where it's at? How is it possible where metals are falling? Yeah, I know what Steve said about Russia and China buying up metals and such, and then I understand all that. I guess I'm looking for a much more simple, clean answer, kind of, not at the expense of facts, but just to make sure that we have the story right, or the actual history right, and then this will help us prepare. And this will also help us know what's coming next, because at the heart of all of our problems, I believe, is the central banking system, in particular the Federal Reserve. And as we now go into income tax season, or are in income tax season, of course, this also comes into play. Think about this before you pay your taxes, and as well too, any wars perhaps against Iran, Syria, anything that we get involved in, look at the central bankers, look at the Federal Reserve, look at the Bank of England, or the London Bank, and all of this.
Look at the G7 and the upcoming G20, or the G20. Today, Bank of England closes in on China currency deal. And this is something we talked about through the currency wars. The Bank of England expects to sign a final agreement to set up a 3-year yuan sterling swap line shortly, during a meeting between Sir Mervyn and his counterpart in Beijing. European and U.S. officials have been pressing China for years to do more to open up the yuan to market forces, saying its artificial weakness was one of the key imbalances of the global economy. Beijing is slowly delivering, although it still keeps a very tight rein on gains for the currency, for fear it will weaken its export powerhouse economy, which has the biggest engine of global growth for a decade. This would be the latest string in the bilateral currency agreements that has been seen. Cross-border trading of the yuan expanded fourfold since August of 2010, and the first with the major development economy.
Okay. Well, in the end, and as we look at things, the central banking system as it exists today, the Ben Bernanke's, the plans behind this, these are the plans behind the plans. And I think if we have a good handle on how things are going to be playing out with the Fed, we're going to be able to understand and kind of insulate ourselves against, or at least with some understanding, we could perhaps develop some defense against what's about to take place in terms of the economic collapse, the collapse of the U.S. dollar. And people would say, well, why would, if the Fed, for example, is so critical, figure so prominently and everything, why would they want to destroy the U.S. dollar if they're printing it out like, and if they're also getting paid through income tax? If our income taxes we pay via income taxes going to the Federal Reserve or central banking system to pay the interest on the debt, why would they want to tank the dollar? Those are my questions, because to me a lot of this doesn't make sense. So what I've done is been researching this and writing something out so I can understand it. And if I can understand it, believe me, I think everyone reading it will be able to understand it. And I think, once again, this will give us some key flares, key signs for when to expect what. I'm not going to try to date set, but I certainly can. By doing this, I think, Joe, through your research too, and you've been researching other things as well, but through this, I think that we can kind of get an idea of when things might be happening or what signs to look for preceding a total, real bad collapse. And I think that this is another reason why the DHS is preparing, obviously, for massive unrest here in the States. Why? Well, because they know that there's going to be fighting in the streets, and it's going to have to do with the collapse of the dollar, in addition to other things, but that's going to be the center point on this. So all of this, I mean, and this was long planned, from the 1700s. I've got to tell you, and
there's no better way to enslave a people, as one of the founding fathers said. I think it was Thomas Jefferson. Then he referenced the evil centralization the banks' control had on other countries, and that was one of the major reasons of independence. That's from the taxes, from the corrupt banking system, and after decades of having presidents in there who understood this, there came people who became part of the new normalized America that's socially manipulated and engineered and changed America. And they who was president when they did the Federal Reserve deal?
Woodrow
Wilson.
Yeah,
he even admitted after his presidency that he was conned by the money powers into creating that, or helped be a part in creating it.
Right, and of course the creatures or the Jekyll Island meeting. But one of the biggest things that I thought, and I had to check. I actually checked the text of a history book today, a high school level history book, the origins of the War of 1812. And in fact, folks, you can even go on Wikipedia, and I'll tell you why this is important in a second. But people are saying, of course, the War of 1812. It was a war between the United States and the British Empire, specifically Great Britain and North America. Now, it was a 3-year war, basically, but historians have been in debate over the reason for that war. Well, trade restrictions was one thing. There were numerous other reasons named, especially in the high school history book, but it was glossed over pretty nicely. But the real reason is this. In 1812, the president, Thomas Jefferson, refused to renew the central bank's charter. At that time, we had a central bank, the first bank of the U.S. and the second bank of the U.S. Well, no, we refused to. Okay, thank you. The United States refused to renew the bank charter. So that's the real reason. So if they lie about that, if history has lied about that, and of course the future panics, like the Panic of 1837 and so on, if they lie about
history, it's for the present too.
That's what I'm saying. It's a template for the current lies.
Yeah.
And if you look at the pattern, it's just like looking at the pattern of terrorist attacks. It's like looking at, when the phrase "there's nothing new under the sun," man, that's take that literally. Excuse me, literally.
Nothing new, just different ways of presenting it or bringing something about.
Yes, exactly. Now I'll tell you this. It's my understanding we have our guest on the line. Is that right? Or we have a guest in queue. Okay, I just want to tell the folks a little bit about our guest here. I got to tell you, I have never talked to a more lively person, more informed person about numerous topics than our guest tonight. Our guest tonight is, to me, just a fabulous person. Her name is Risa LaRue Kirkland. She's known as War Chick on the internet. Now, don't let that fool you. Risa is a military historian, a conservative commentator. She's been on, numerous talk show hosts. I want her autograph, okay? She's the author of the forthcoming Forgotten Warrior series. She, I've heard this before, and I wondered where this came from, this phrase, political castration. And you might think, well, that's such a small thing. I mean, no, it's a phrase that has caught on in numerous venues. And Islamism, that's one I heard too. Well, she coined both those terms and phrases. Islamism is perhaps one of the most perfect descriptive terms that I have ever heard about Islam and communism.
Yeah, we just need Nazi to tie in the word Nazi and satanic, and we'll have the perfect word to describe all the evils that have manipulated our society, our governments, and infiltrated them.
Now, those of you listening to the program tonight, you know that our home base is HomelandSecurityUS.com. That's HomelandSecurityUS.com. Do us a favor. If you're listening to this broadcast, go ahead and click on the title tonight, Truth is Stranger Than Fiction. And in addition to clicking like for Facebook, which does spread the word, scroll down, and at the bottom of that article is a picture of our guest, along with links directly to her site on the internet, War Chick. And there's also a link to her Twitter account and a link to her Facebook account. But if you look at her website, definitely you've got to look at Forgotten Warrior twice in one day. You've got to look at that because that's what we're going to be opening up with tonight. And then we're going to be getting into a lot of other comments as well. But I just have to say, singing her praises, that she is, having spoken with her last week and Joe, having spoken with her today, quite the informed individual. She is knowledgeable about numerous things. And I've got to tell you, the situation in Korea, we're going to be talking about that tonight. We're going to be talking about Islamism and the larger agenda of what's taking place here in this country. Now, she's got a degree in education, but how many people do you know that have a degree from higher learning, but stands firmly against the National Education Association? She knows their deep, dark secrets. The War Chick, Risa, that she knows. Now, she's been online since 2002, as we have, and she's on with us. With that, I'm not sure if Risa is wrestling a bear or a cougar over there from British Columbia. Risa, are you with us?
How's this? Not Sanic. Not Nazi and satanic, not Sanic. That'd be perfect.
Not Xanic. Wow, that sounds like a drug that somebody should be taking for ADD. No.
Good point. Good point. Actually, I am in Provo, Utah. We moved here 6 months ago, and so I'm actually from in Provo right now, not the British Columbia area. Wow, talk about singing my praises, man. You were the whole Tabernacle Choir. That was awesome.
Well, it was great talking with you the other day, and I just got quite the education with respect to, the incident in Korea just blew my mind. I mean, when I say truth is stranger than fiction, this story that you're going to open up with, that we're going to give you the floor for, folks, you got to hear this because it'll blow your mind. And because, Risa, because of the fact that we've got some time tonight, really I want you to take your time and really go through the history of this account because, you okay? You okay? Risa?
Me? Yes, I'm just fine. Sorry.
Okay, that's all right. We were just getting a lot of, you're blowing our ear, or making our ears bleed with, that's okay. Just go ahead and take your time with this. If you don't mind, let's open up your story about about a gentleman in Korea during the Korean conflict. Like I said, we've got a little bit more time than perhaps you've been given in the past and you're used to, but this is a story about private first class. Well, I'll tell you what. You go ahead and tell the story, and if I missed anything about your background, go ahead and shoot that in there too. But we're going to give you the floor.
No, you're very thorough, and I had a great talk today with your son as well. It went on way longer than we were planning, but I do have the gift of gab, so I do tend to do that. Actually, what's funny is I had grown up with my dad, who served during the Korean War, and he, on occasion, would mention a friend of his that died in Korea, and that's all he would say. Never really elaborated a whole lot more. And he mentioned the movie one or two times, but didn't go a lot further. And that's quite common, I've come to find, with Korean War vets. America forgot their war, so they kind of have not been as willing to share. But anyway, one night in the summer of 1991, right before I was to do my student teaching that fall, we were over visiting him with my now ex-husband and my son, and I was just kind of bored, and I wanted to, maybe go upstairs, look through scrapbooks, which I kind of always like to do. My dad was not the most forthcoming with certain things. Oh, excuse me, sorry about that, sound on my computer. And I was looking through his scrapbook, and I came across this very glossy 8x10 picture, and at the bottom it said by Paramount Pictures. And I couldn't figure out what it was doing in my dad's scrapbook, so I kind of lifted it a little bit, and I looked at the back, and it said, with love, Robert, from the Carrasco family. And I was stunned by that, and on the same page, there was a graduation picture of a man who was also in the Paramount picture. And on the back, it said Ricardo Carrasco, class of 1952. And I was stunned by that. And then folded up in my dad's scrapbook was a letter from Ricardo that was actually written 2 days before the event that the book centers around in his life. And I went ahead, read it, and I was even more confused. And then there was an article in there, a Reader's Digest article from November of 1959. And I opened it up, and it was written by Hal Wallace, who was, I guess, back in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, especially the 40s and 50s, he would be equivalent to someone like Steven Spielberg today. His nickname was the Star Maker for Paramount Pictures. He'd had a falling out with the Warner Brothers, which is where he'd been before, moved to Paramount, and everyone he ever tapped to become a star became a star. And he wrote this article. And the article was called The Movie Star You Never Saw. And I'm like, I don't get it. Why is all this stuff on the same page? And I started to read it. And it was about the only person that ever turned him down when he offered a Hollywood contract, and it was my dad's friend, Ricardo Carrasco.
Now, just if I can interrupt here, the Hal Wallace was, and I just from my research for this program tonight, was, I mean, your depiction of him is like the current day Steven Spielberg. I mean, he could make a star overnight.
Oh,
that's
yeah, he did too.
Yeah, and people really have to understand how big. I mean, imagine yourself let's say over in Afghanistan or Iraq fighting a war, or either your son or your daughter or whatever, and getting a call from Spielberg or another big director, or but that
is huge. It is. I mean, he did Casablanca, Gunfight at the OK Corral. He did all the Martin and Lewis films. He even did all the Elvis ones, which I went, that's not that impressive. But you have to understand, he was the only person in Hollywood who saw that this could become huge, that there was an audience for that. And the Elvis films are horrific, but they have a massive cult following, and they have made just millions. And they were made very cheaply, and they've become classics. Everybody loves them, and he's the only one in Hollywood that saw that. And as you stated, everyone he ever pegged to become a star did. That's why he had that nickname of the Star Maker. And I was reading through it, and in it, he talked about how in 1953 he was approached by a director friend of his named Owen Crump about making a movie on the front lines of Korea, which had not been done, the entire thing made on the front lines, and even more, choosing all of the frontline actors to play in this fictional Easy Patrol from frontline troops. There would be no actors.
All right, folks, we should be back up. I'm going to bring my dad on here. That was not on our end. That was
There we go. All right. Sorry about that, ladies and gentlemen. We are connected through Christians United Broadcasting Network, where we've got multiple connections and redundancies, and we apologize for that.
I'm going to try and bring our guest back on. All right.
Are you serious?
What happened?
Are you serious?
What?
I'm getting a prompt to enter our ID number.
You are?
Yeah.
8.
You're not hearing it?
No. 852-263-7277. I'm not hearing anything. I'm not even hearing you. All right, let's see, guys. Can you hear me in the chat? You can hear me. Okay, that's interesting because I can't hear anything. And it says we're still live. I can't hear you. No.
Risa, are you there?
No, she's not. I didn't add her yet. Troy, I don't know if you can hear me.
So you and I are going to have a discussion a while.
You can hear her?
We apologize. No, it's us. We're configured through Christians United Broadcasting Network. Apparently, they got knocked off the platform, and I apologize. So it's nothing he did or said. It's sometimes it happens. Joe, are we on the air?
Yeah, we're on the air. It says your audio is very low. They can hear me only, which I don't understand. So, how about this? It wasn't me. We're hooked into BTR. You drop your call. I'll call you. I'll add you back into the call and see if we can't figure out what this is, or just use phones. I mean, I don't understand the level of problems that we seem to be having, but for whatever reason they are occurring. So if you drop off, I'm on the air, you're not, or you're very muffled and your sound is very low.
I'm not even connected.
Okay, you're not connected, so hang up the call. Or I'll hang you up.
I just hung up.
Okay, let's try this. Live radio. I mean, really, this is okay. Let's see. I think, yeah, you can join the call. All right. No, you joined the wrong call. All right. Okay, now I'm getting a prompt. Wait a second. I don't know. You're calling in. You're trying to call in as host. Hang up. This is so much fun. Could she call in with the phone? Would it be an inconvenience if she called in on a phone? Okay. Not a problem. Tell her call in, press 1. Just hang in there with us until we get this cleared up here. It's unfortunate. I apologize. It's like I don't know how we're. No. And plus, we're streaming out over a couple of AM and 1 FM station right now. So it's yes. Okay, they can't hear the guest and they can't hear you. Okay, hang up. How do I hang up? You hit leave this call, right click on the Skype. All right, thank you very much. All right. How you like? It's from all different countries. We'll to avoid. All right. Here we go. There we go. Risa, are you back with us?
Okay, can you guys hear me?
We can. I can hear you.
Yes, we can. Okay.
And
okay.
Once again, it's amateur hour on Friday night. Now we got kicked off, but we're back on. I think all systems are operable. Are they not, Joe? Let me just double check. I'm just adding Troy to the call, and we should be good. AM stations.
Wonderful.
For a check. Okay, we got AM, we got FM. Hang on, FM. All righty, checking in. All right. Okay. Sorry. So we are back up across the board. I want to thank everybody for their patience while we go through these problems.
You guys have a huge audience. I was looking in the chat room before I came on, and I was going down through the list, and it was just millions of names. You guys have a great audience.
Well, see, they tune in just to laugh at occasions like this. Seriously, it's kind of a self-esteem builder. You know what? I'll tell you what. We were interrupted, and we're glad you're back, Risa. Thank you so much for your being so kind with and thank you.
Oh, you're kidding! I love stuff like this. It's just so human. I love it.
It's just kind of funny how things happen. Okay, now, folks, where we left off was with Korea, soldiers, Steven Spielberg type of guy, director, producer kind of guy. Just take it from there. You've got the floor, Risa.
Yeah. Okay, I will.
You're good now. Okay.
Are we ready to go? Or?
All right.
Troy, you got a hot mic.
You guys are good. Troy is out.
All right. Christian United. Okay, go ahead. Go ahead, Risa.
Okay, and then I started to read the article, and it mentioned how Owen Crump had wanted to do it in black and white. And they knew this had never been done before, but they had a very good relationship with the DOD. Hollywood and the DOD at the time had a wonderful relationship after World War II. And there was no problem getting permission. And at the last minute, in the spring of '53, 3D had just started. And they decided to make the one and only war movie ever made in 3D, and it was Ceasefire. Now, originally, they were going to call the movie One Quiet Day, but later they changed it to Ceasefire when the ceasefire went into effect, because there was never a truce. The war still goes on to this day, and this year is the 60th anniversary of the ceasefire. I was reading through it, and lo and behold, to my shock, there's the name PFC Ricardo Carrasco from Texas, and he and my dad had grown up in El Paso, Texas. And my jaw just dropped, and I realized this was my dad's friend that was in his scrapbook and graduated from Austin High School same year as my dad, and I couldn't believe it. And I kept reading through it, and apparently what had happened, they decided to film the movie right there on the front line. The director went over to Korea with the first ever 3D camera taken overseas, and he handpicked among frontline and just back of frontline troops 13 American soldiers and one ROK soldier to play in this film. And one of them he handpicked was Ricardo Carrasco.
Okay, and this is like at the tail end of the war now. This is after.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, this was in 1953, and they took all the men, they put them in Seoul at the War Correspondence Building, where all the war correspondents stayed, and it was amazing. They got to stay in real beds. They sat at tables with tablecloths, had waiters. All the war correspondents gave them a standing ovation when they walked in. One of the men later told me we got all the cigars and whiskey we wanted from the war correspondents. They just loved us. And they would do the filming every day, and they would come back and stay at night. And they were thrilled, all of them were thrilled to be chosen for this movie out of the fighting, except for one, and that was Ricardo Carrasco. But anyway, as they were filming this, they started about mid-June to film, and they sent the rushes back to Hal Wallace at Paramount. And as he was watching the rushes, he went on to say, I've never known how to define the it I see when I see it in somebody, and I know they're going to be a star. But there it was. It was that it. And he went ahead and immediately wired back to Owen Crump. This kid from Texas is incredible. Offer him our basic 2-year contract with Paramount.
Wow.
And he's 19 years old. 19, never been an actor, never done any of that. He was planning to be a career military man.
Okay, now by rushes, you're talking about the film that they shot.
Right.
Okay.
The first bits of film he's putting together because they'll clean it up and do a lot of the editing back at Paramount. That Hal Wallace was producing this. He was the money guy. He was the guy that got in Paramount to back it and everything. So everything pretty much had to go through his approval. And now Owen Crump, you've got to understand, had been in the Air Force in World War II, in the Signal Corps, and had done a lot of the filming there, especially, it was the Army Air Corps in World War II, especially plane work, and actually had a young captain under his tutelage at the time named Ronald Reagan, and he worked for Owen Crump during the war in the Signal Corps. I know, that was fantastic. I just love that.
Wow.
And anyway, so Crump knew war. I mean, he was a full bird colonel by the time the war ended, World War II. So he knew military protocol very well. He got along very well with the military brass. There was no problem. They respected him. The men respected him. And this was written up by the military, which would never happen today, as temporary duty orders. It wasn't something where they were released from the military to star in this movie. This was an order. They were ordered from their units. Now, you have to know this. Ricardo had been squad leader at the time that he was picked for this movie. He spent every day since he landed in March of '53 on the two evil twin sisters of the last days of the war, which were Pork Chop and Baldy. You might know Pork Chop from Gregory Peck's movie, based on the book by General Slam Marshall. But that's where Ricardo had been fighting, Baldy and Pork Chop, and that his unit had been hit so hard that they had been sent back of the lines for R&R rest and recuperation before going back. But he was squad leader, and they said it really, really bugged him. Owen Crump told me this when I tracked him down, and before he died, said he was very restless and moody. He asked every day, when can I go back? None of the other men asked that, not one. He was picked for the movie, and in the movie, this Easy Patrol was to go out on what they knew was going to be the last day of the active fighting. They all knew the ceasefire was going to go into effect that night, but that there was still fighting that went on right up to the minute it was declared. It was really freaky. I've heard this from so many veterans. They even showed it in the series MASH, that you could hear firing in shells right up till the moment of the official declaration. I mean, right up till then, and then just this eerie silence.
Wow.
So there was literally fighting up till the very last second. And the Easy Patrol that was going out knew that the ceasefire was going to go into effect that night. And nobody wants to be the last person to die in a war. And the men, of course, dread these patrols when they know it's all over. But they have to. And in the movie, at the time of Korea, it was all the hill fighting was going on those last months, heavily concentrated in the areas of Pork Chop and Baldy. And in the movie, they decided they wanted to base their hill actually on Pork Chop, but they called it Red Top in the movie. Obvious reasons, you know, they called the communist Reds. And they just wanted something that people could relate to what they were reading in the paper. And Easy Patrol was to go out, and one of the Americans that everyone was supposed to come to love would die in that patrol just hours before the ceasefire. And the director had decided that Ricardo would be the one to die on that last day of the war. And his part was pivotal because they really had to establish his character in order to get the audience to really like him in that short of a time. And every single day, what really got to me as I tracked down old friends of his, letters, his family, each of the men that had been in the movie with him that were still living, what really got to me is that every night his prayer would be the same. You know, please God, don't let the Chinese attack till I get back. Now, the reason they knew that this was being planned is staying at the War Correspondence Building. They had radios there, and the war correspondents were around them quite a bit, getting the information to find the hot spots to go to and report on. And at the time that Ricardo was picked for the movie, there were about 100,000 Chinese, Chi-Coms, amassing around Pork Chop. Well, they all knew what that meant. They were planning a massive offensive on Pork Chop because they, too, knew that the war was going to come to some sort of end in a matter of days. And if you know anything about the communist mentality, it doesn't matter that the final drop of the line between North and South Korea actually has North Korea with less lines. They had to have these wins that they could either blow up or flat out lie about as wins for propaganda. And you got to remember, propaganda, only the lie needs propaganda. The truth can stand on its own. And that's why people like socialist, communists and Islam use propaganda. It is their number one tool. because they know that it's based on lies. They know that humans recognize that. So fear, intimidation, and outright manipulations and lies are absolutely necessary to advance their agendas. And as informed as your audience is, I know I'm preaching to the choir on this, but for communism, it didn't matter. We lost 38,000 in Korea actually itself during the fighting phases. To give you an idea, the North Koreans and Chinese lost 65,000 in the month of July 1953 alone.
Wow.
That's what they're willing to do. They thought we had a silly sentimentality towards human life, and they didn't. The state is what matters, not the individual human life.
Wow.
And, anyway, we were fighting to keep Pork Chop, which was basically just a giant Chinese outpost. And they based Red Top on it. Now, with all of the war correspondents hanging around, they knew what was happening, and every morning after Ricardo would say that prayer the night before, he would run to the war correspondents and he would ask them, did the Chinese attack last night? And they would say no. And before he would go to breakfast or anything else, he would go back and thank God that they hadn't.
Wow.
And, a lot of the other men told me, we thought he was nuts. We really thought he was crazy.
Here's a 19-year-old hitting his knee.
Right.
Wow. Okay.
Right. They were all so excited to be out of the fighting because they knew that the war was going to be over in days or a ceasefire or something. And they were thrilled. And at 19, they just couldn't understand. He had his whole life ahead of him. And even Owen Crump told me, I kept wondering, is he on a glory kick? What's with this kid? Is he bucking for a promotion? And because he said every day that kid would ask me, are you going to kill me off today? Or how quickly? Or how soon? And it was driving Owen Crump nuts. And when he sent the Rushes back to Hal Wallace, he was really actually quite excited when Wallace wrote back to him, this Carrasco kid from Texas is fantastic. He said, offer him a contract. And he said, okay, now the thought of fame and money and women and anything he could ever want. Because you got to remember, they were raised on newsreels and they were raised on going to the movies all day on Saturday. Good grief, I must have heard that story a million times from my dad. He'd work for a quarter. That would buy him an all-day pass to the Werewolf and all kinds of movies that were going on. And it would also buy a giant pop and a giant candy bar, and they would just sit in there all day. And they all did that. Every Saturday, they were either doing that or they were out in the desert of El Paso with guns playing war, which I loved. I used to do that too. But anyway, they were raised with Hollywood in its heyday, with John Wayne and Gary Cooper and all of that. These were their heroes. Audie Murphy, another Texan who became a Hollywood hero after he became a war hero. And they were raised on that. So Owen Crump was sure with this offer that Ricardo would leave him alone. And he made the offer one night after they were done filming, and he was in the tent where they would go over the film, make sure they got the scenes right. And he called Ricardo into it. Ricardo came in, and he had him be at ease, and told him, he said, you know who Hal Wallace is? And he goes, well, of course, we all know who Hal Wallace is. Casablanca was still huge then, and everyone loved Humphrey Bogart. They were always trying to be Humphrey Bogart. And he said, well, Hal Wallace has offered you a contract with Paramount. He's so impressed with what he has seen of you. And Owen Crump said, I kind of sat back, waiting for like the color to drain from his face, for him to scream and jump up and down. And he said the kid just kept a stare. And after a few minutes, he just said, no, thank you, sir. Do you know yet when you're planning to kill me? And Owen Crump was stunned. He said, I could not believe it. And he said, I was sure I'd misunderstood, or he had. And I said, son, he's offering you a 2-year contract with Paramount. That never happens. You will be rich and famous, and you'll have women at your beck and call. You will be a Hollywood idol. And he just kind of started stammering and saying, no, you know, I've got to get back. My unit needs me. The guy that took my place was very green. And Owen Crump just finally he said, I threw down my pen and I said, damn it, you tell me now. What is going on with you? You have been riding me since you got here about me killing you off and you leaving, and you know as well as I do that this war ends in days. And he said, you're going to tell me right now. And he said, well, you know, they're counting on me. I've got to get back there. And he said, they've got someone taking your place. They're pulling out of a lot of these areas. And he said it took him about 10 minutes to get Ricardo to just sit down and tell him. And he finally did. And he said, yeah, I know it's going to end soon. But he said, my dad raised me to be responsible. And he said, and the guy that took my place is very green. He doesn't know Baldy and pork chop like I do. He'll get my men killed. And he said, you've got to understand, sir, because it was all sir with him. I could not live with myself if one of my men got killed because I wasn't there. And he said, you know, you're not this whole army. You know, men die in war. And he said, yeah. And most of them I can't do anything about. But these guys, if there's a chance I can, then I will.
Imagine that at 19.
At 19. More character at 19 than unfortunately my generation saw until we were deeply entrenched in our 30s, you know, and I'll be 47 next week. And I recognized that when I saw it that summer of 91. And I just felt chills. And he was so angry, Owen Crump was. He called him a damn fool and said, you get out of this tent while I cool down. He said, yes, sir, and he left. And they went back to the war correspondence that night, and Crump was mad. He wouldn't look Ricardo in the eye, wouldn't talk to him. He could not believe what he had just turned down. And so he ended up sending off a wire. Phone calls were very difficult back then, so it was a wire to Hal Wallace. And he said he was shaking. He goes, no one had ever turned Wallace down. And he said, and I knew he could have a temper. And he wrote and told him, you know, the kid said he has to get back to his squad, and there's still fighting going on. And he goes, I know he's a fool, and but he turned it down. Wallace was furious. Crump said he told me later that he broke his favorite vase that his wife had given him. He was so angry. But once he cooled down, he wired back to Crump and he said, okay, well, you know, we've seen war, you've seen war. The war's going to be over in days. He said, once his sense of duty is fulfilled, we'll make the offer again. And that's how badly Wallace wanted him.
So there was an additional overture. Rizzo, hold that thought. We're up against the top of the hour break, which is a few minutes late because of recalibration of our program clocks, where we're going to be right back after about 3 minutes. Can you stay with us? Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann and Hagmann Report on this, the 22nd day of February 2013. I'm Doug Hagmann. With me in studio is Joe Hagmann. Together we are the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, for your patience. We're going to be right back with more from our very special guest, War Chick. Risa Kirkland. Stay with us. Hi folks, Doug Hagmann here. You might know me as the co-host from the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, or as a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. If you're like me, you're tired and confused over today's headlines. You just don't know where to turn for accurate, concise information about really what's going on, what's truly going on in today's society. If you don't know where to turn for accurate, well-researched, and properly vetted news, I've got a suggestion. In fact, it's a requirement. Bookmark Canada Free Press. That's CanadaFreePress.com on the internet. It's just not for Canada. It's for news across the world. Judy McLeod, founding editor, has put together a vast array of talented writers like Kelly O'Connell, Daniel Greenfield, Dr. Aileta Johnson-Powell, a lot of guest columnists, very talented writers. Folks, that's Canada Free Press at CanadaFreePress.com. Now mobile friendly. Follow on Facebook, because without America, there is no free world.
Survival of the fittest. In any and all situations, survival is your number one priority. That requires being tough and thinking smart. And the folks at Freeze Dry Guy are going to help you do just that. They have the long-range patrol ration entrees, what they call the Brick Pack. When you're in survival mode, it is absolutely the best item for your survival pack or bug-out bag. You can go farther, faster, and carry more food with the LRP cold weather ration entrees. Not only do these long-lasting, durable entrees help sustain you or your family through the harshest environment or situation, they are by far the most delicious of their kind. No contest. With a variety of tasty entrees, you can't beat the LRP Brick Packs. Let Freeze Dry Guy help you in your survival situations. Go to freezedryguy.com. That's freezedryguy.com. Or call 866-404-3663. That's 866-404-FOOD.
You better wake up fast and listen to this, America. The Obama campaign has launched attack squads disguised as truth teams dedicated to intimidating and silencing all political dissent carried over the internet that criticizes the Marxist Obama. Truth squads specifically focused on covering up Obama's endless trail of lies, corruption, and subversion, and using the Gestapo power of our own government to police and censor the internet and shut down websites that dare to carry the real truth about Obama's Marxist coup. Remember the names of these Gestapo-style agencies at work right there in your neighborhood: KeepingHisWord.com, KeepingGOPHonest.com, and AttackWatch.com. KGB, SS, and Gestapo-style police-state gangster organizations at work to silence the important voices of patriot dissent, some of which have already been shut down by Obama's orders. Adolf Hitler would have been proud. We're the 21st century Tea Party patriots.
Hold on to your seats. The Hagmann and Hagmann flight is now taking off. Doug and Joe Hagmann have cleared the runway of TSA agents, jihadists, political crackpots, and global elitists. Now get ready for some real news. Here they are, Doug and Joe Hagmann.
And welcome back, folks, to a Friday edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. You know, location, Korea. Date, July 6, 1953. Weeks before the end of the Korean conflict, the Korean War. The police action there, where many American lives were lost. The forgotten war and the forgotten soldiers from that time. And here is a 19-year-old young man fighting for his country named Ricardo Carrasco, and getting offers from the Steven Spielberg of the day to be the next star, the next movie star on the big screen. Remember the big screen, motion pictures, moving pictures back then. And of course, after a period of time where the Paramount Studios were actually filming the actual battles and then FedExing, I'm kidding, but rushing the films back to Paramount Studios. The producer or the director, the bigwigs at the studio saying, "Man, this guy, this Ricardo, he's going to be the next Audie Murphy." And if you don't know who Audie Murphy is, folks, Well, just ask your grandparents. But you know, the next big star, and yet Ricardo says, you know what? No, I got to keep to my men. I got to keep to my men. I got to keep to my job. I got to keep to my men because the Chinese are amassing. And then we've got, as Risa narrated, we got him hitting his knees every morning and every night, saying, "Please, God, keep my troops safe. Keep the troops safe. Let them stay safe until I get back." And Risa, of course, we're talking with Risa Kirkland. Warcheck.com is her website. That's warcheck.com. And she's gracious enough to hang in there with us through all of our audio issues, which I think have since been resolved. But that said, Risa, welcome back and pick up where you left off.
I will. Right now my website is americaswarchick.blogspot.com. Keep your fingers crossed that I can get my kidnapped warchick.com back from the people that stole it and are trying to sell it back to me for thousands. Like, yeah, I'm going to come to that, or just come up with a new name, one way or the other. But no, I'll get it. I learned a lot from studying men like Ricardo, and I can get ass-kicky when I need to. So
I understand. I wouldn't get, you know what, from your reputation, I would not get in the ring with you. With that.
I'm just a sweet old mom. I am getting old. I'm pushing 50 here. I'm getting very, very old. My sons are constantly reminding me of that when I'm wanting to go do all this fun stuff. Mom, you're old. I'm always shocked when they say that, but no, I'm too. So.
Well, no, but I'll tell you what, you're giving us an interesting tale here. You're providing us just a great, and folks, you're not going to believe how this turns out because
it ties into current events we're seeing unfold and talked about today through North Korea, the UN, and we're going to get into that.
Yeah, but this is just a fascinating story, and but Risa, you got the floor. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway. And I love what you said earlier about how he would always hit his knees, and that was his prayer every night. Don't let the Chinese attack, because if you know anything about Korea, the Chinese loved nighttime attacks. They almost always attacked at night. It's more frightening. They were known for screeching, screaming, blowing whistles, ringing bells, and noisemakers that you use at like New Year's parties. And they would just do that to create confusion, to create fear, to keep you distracted. You never knew what direction it was coming from. They were also very poorly funded. A lot of the Chinese soldiers didn't even have weapons on them. They would run over with a lot of grenades, and it was very, very common to find just opium pipes everywhere because apparently they didn't have food, but they were pumping them full of opium to get them to do a lot of the crazy stuff they did, like running and going over a tank like ants, but not having any arms on them at all. They had to know they were going to die, I guess. Man. I guess you would have to pump them full of opium to get them to do that, but our men spoke about that a lot, just opium pipes everywhere, and the horror of them having to be drugged like that to get to go do all this stuff. But anyway, they loved nighttime attacks, and so his prayer every night was the same, and the first thing he would do in the morning, you know, it's so funny, when I was interviewing one of the men from the movie, they said before he would take a piss, and then he would just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry." And I said, "I know men pee. Don't worry. I'm not offended." And I said, I'm married and I have 2 sons, so I've wised up to that one. And it was so cute, you know, because they tend to be more gentle around women. And I want the full truth. My attitude is our obligation is to truth, not politeness or comfort. Truth. And if someone's offended by truth, never trust them. And you just shouldn't. If the truth offends them, don't trust them.
Indeed.
And I certainly wouldn't. But anyway, that is why he did that every night, and that is why first thing he would do would be to run and ask first thing in the morning. And then he would again hit his knees, thanking God that they hadn't attacked, that God had answered his prayer, and so far they had not attacked Pork Chop yet. And anyway, Owen Crump received the message back from Hal Wallace that, all right, I've calmed down, so we'll go ahead and make the offer again once, the war's over. And Owen Crump nodded and said, okay. Well, as they got into July, it was still going on. Ricardo was bugging him every single day, several times a day. How close are you to killing me off? I really need to get back. The Chinese aren't going to wait forever. He really seemed to have a sense that he was on borrowed time on this. And one of the most fascinating things to me about Ricardo's character is he and my dad had a friend back home named Calvin Crenshaw. And Calvin had signed up, but he was still stateside while Ricardo was over in Korea, and my dad was on a sub during the war. The Navy, especially subs, didn't really see as much battle during Korea as they did during World War II. Korea didn't have a Navy, the biggest reason. And Calvin was back home, and he was just a wealth of information, of letters, because my dad and Ricardo had lost track of each other after Christmas of that year, and my dad only got one letter from Ricardo before Ricardo died. And Calvin back home, his letters, Ricardo at first, when he was at boot camp at Fort Riley, was writing all the time, very macho, when are you going to join up like a man? Oh man, I love this little M1, the M1 Garand that they had. He loved firing that. Talking about going through training and PT and turning down a chance for officer candidate school because he wanted to be a paratrooper. And he went ahead and he went to Fort Benning to be a paratrooper. He wanted to be part of the 82nd Airborne. And this part broke everyone's heart. They all thought he was going to be a paratrooper. He was slightly nearsighted. And especially back then, everybody wanted to be a paratrooper, and they could be very picky. And if you were nearsighted, and remember, they didn't have things like contacts or the surgeries they did now. You had to wear glasses. So you can kind of see why. If you were nearsighted, you could not be a paratrooper. And he was turned down for that, and it broke his heart. Being 19 and not skilled or anything at the time, they put him in the infantry, and he was in Korea in March of 53. And so everyone was pretty shocked when they found out he was in Korea. But anyway, that was kind of a background thing on him. He had very much wanted to be a paratrooper, but he was in the infantry, and he was doing a great job. The first day he arrived in Korea, he went up Old Wally. And I'll tell you, the macho was knocked right out of him. His letters from Korea, there was a stark difference. And he no longer razzed Calvin about joining up. In fact, the PS on that first letter from Korea was, I hope this doesn't find you in the Army. And all of his letters before then had been goading Calvin about manhood, everything else. And the letters kind of went back and forth between, they should, bomb this place and start over. It's, you got to understand, too, Korea had been a slave state to Japan for 35 years, from 1910 to 1945. And with the unconditional surrender of Japan, Korea kind of became, the Allies' responsibility, which meant us and Russia, and that's how it ended up divided. The UN voted that all of Korea was recognized as the ROK, but the Soviets stayed home, and then they and North Korea had a vote 3 weeks later, as all of Korea was the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. We know when they sneak those words in there like democratic and people, it's commie. And the puppet they put in was Kim Il-sung, who was just basically Stalin's lapdog. He just did whatever Stalin wanted. And
actually, this is actually setting the stage for what we're seeing today. I mean, what happened back?
Yes,
yeah,
yes,
all right.
Absolutely. And it's so funny, you know, all Asian nations tend to have this belief, Japan did, China did, Korea did, that their leaders are part deity. If you remember, the emperor couldn't speak on the radio, you couldn't look at him because he was part deity, the emperor of Japan. And that's why MacArthur had the first thing. He had to speak on the radio and tell them about the surrender. And that was the first time Japan had ever heard his voice. And he had to walk among his people. They had themselves photographed with them, which he did not want to do, not just for that reason, but also because he was a good 6 inches shorter than MacArthur. And they didn't like that, but nope, there's MacArthur filmed with him and our other leaders, and he looks like a child next to him, and that's not saving face. And then several of our generals also rode his white horse. There is this attitude of deity. Well, Kim Il-sung was considered part deity, so was Kim Jong-il. In fact, they said when Kim Jong-il was born, 2 rainbows and a new star lit the sky.
Right.
Now, you need to know the significance of that. Kim Il-sung's mother was a Christian. Now, Kim Il-sung knew that his enemy was always going to be America. And he knew America was a nation based on Judeo-Christian beliefs. So you tell me, why did he pick 2 rainbows and a star? That was a message to us that the Messiah had been born. And then the double rainbow, probably because they did believe that their leaders, Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, could control the wind and the waves and the rivers and the rain. Now, how they explained the drought all through the 90s that put them into the worst famine in their history.
Yeah, and I often say it's not what we believe, it's what they believe. You know, we have to look at everything through their anyone's from their perspective, from anyone's perspective.
Absolutely. And they also, Kim Il-sung was born while he was in a camp in the Soviet Union up in Siberia. But they are not allowed to teach that. They teach that he was born on the highest peak in Korea, Mount Taeku, and that night there was that new star and the double rainbow. I don't know how they did a rainbow at night, you know, but there's no reasoning with the commie mindset. And so you have to understand that the Korean people are actually taught that their leader is part deity. And the communists, even though they don't believe in God, they're fine with that. You know, China did it. Now, once the communists came in, they got totally rid of God. But there's still that godlike image in all communist nations. What, you know, the leader says, that's it.
Exactly.
You know, it's the truth. There's a reason in communist countries, and you see this in Islam too, remember Saddam, that they have statues and massive pictures everywhere they go.
Right.
That is an idol. They are setting them up as gods. And communism may not believe in religion, but their actions, they believe in some form of a god in idol worship, and that's, you know, that's not God the Father, but that's their god, their idol. But you have to understand that was the North Korean mindset and the communist mindset at the time. And for them to surrender was not going, they would rather, as I said, 65,000 in 1 month.
Right.
They would rather all be wiped out. And just a side note here, that is why MacArthur wanted to drop the bomb on the Chinese. And it's so funny, you know, because he was fired for that, Truman. And Omar Bradley, a good friend of his, actually wrote to him and said, you know, Mac, you're a soldier. You know better than to disobey an order from a higher officer. And Truman was considered commander-in-chief. But his letter back is what struck me. He wrote to him and he said, you know, Brad, if we don't get the China problem under control now, they will be the number one problem our grandchildren will face at the turn of the century.
Interesting.
And what is hilarious is in 1999, right that week before New Year's Day, they were doing all these, what are the top 10 whatever.
Right.
And one thing they did is, what are the top 10 threats to America as we enter the 21st century? And guess what number one was? China.
Right. And don't forget, Risa, too, during the 90s, and I know we're straying off of the story of Ricardo Carrasco, but back in the 90s, don't forget the relationship that Clintons had. I wouldn't even call it a relationship. Just the open secrets to China, and then of course during the Nixon administration, the Kissinger plan. So yeah, indeed.
Right.
But if we can, let's circle back around to Ricardo.
Well, I'm actually going to be tying this in a minute. That's why I'm trying to give you a little bit of the background. But anyway, so all this was going on with Ricardo, and he very much wanted to go back, but he had been raised, in Texas, and he'd been raised by good parents. He was raised Catholic. My dad, like me, was LDS Mormon, and they often would go to one another's churches just to be together. They were always going out shooting in the deserts of El Paso, and you know what's funny? They were 10 years old when they met, and they already had their own 22s that they had bought at the local 5 and dime. 10 years old.
Yeah, try that today.
Not one of them ever thought of turning them on somebody. They all knew how to use them. They all used them right. You know what the big difference was? Moms at home. I've written a lot of articles about that. You can find them online. The number one difference in the life of a child then and now was a mom that was at home.
Amen. Yeah.
Amen.
Look. Yeah, we know. Yeah. Sorry, Risa. I didn't mean to. Go ahead.
I'll just get back to this story. Anyway, all of this was going on kind of in the background. You had the Hogwaws back at the studios, never turned down before, furious. And I was reading this stuff, actually, as I was reading the Reader's Digest article from November of 1959. And I was stunned by it. I was just stunned. And my jaw just kept dropping. And the Reader's Digest article went on to say, and a lot of this stuff I've added from the years of research, that finally the director he couldn't take anymore, and he ended up saying one morning, okay, we need to start shooting the death scene now. And he had rewritten the script to kill Ricardo off 2 weeks ahead of schedule because he could not take his constant nagging every day. When are you going to kill me off? When are you going to kill me off? And he went ahead and he rewrote it. And over the next few days, Ricardo was just ecstatic. They said it's the first time we saw him laughing and just buddying up to everybody. He was thrilled. And the morning of July 6th was the morning they shot the close-ups. They always saved the close-ups for last. And they always did the close-ups in the morning because of the light. And they went ahead that morning and they shot the close-ups of Ricardo's death scene. And Owen Crump came up to him and he said, we could still use some help, with the mics and the booms and moving equipment around, because that 3D camera was massive. It was just huge. And they actually had to put it on a tank or troop transport carrier to move it around. It was that big. And he said, no, I've got to get back. Here's the words that really get me. I've been lucky so far because the Chinese have not yet attacked. Pork chop. But that luck isn't going to last forever. And Owen Crump, in the meantime, he just kind of shook his head. He went around to all the other soldier actors and said, look, would you pull him aside and try to talk him in to staying? And they all did. He wouldn't listen. And finally, late in the afternoon, because he said like he had to go bathroom, one legged in the other, just bouncing around, ready to go. Finally, late in the afternoon, he had one of the men driving back up to the forward area around Pork Chop. Now, the guy that drove him back was actually in his company. He hadn't been in his squad, but he'd been in his company. And his name was Otis Wright, and Otis cussed him out. He said, I cussed him out the whole way.
Just to be clear, this is after shooting the death scene there, right?
Shooting the death scene, yeah. And he cussed him out the whole way for going back. None of the other men ever went back before the ceasefire on July 27th. And he cussed him out. You know, are you on a death trip, a glory trip, what, bucking for promotion? He said that all Ricardo did was just kind of smile, and he talked about the upcoming football season in Texas. If you know Texas, you know, that's everything to them. And he smiled. He would talk about that, and he would talk about his mom. And Otis said, I never forgot that. He would just kind of smile and talk about his mom. And he said that got to me. I let him out up at Pork Chop, and he threw his rucksack over his shoulder, and he turned with one hand and waved back. And he said, and that was my last image of him, you know, with that smile, turning and waving back at me.
Wow.
And he drove back to Seoul. Now, in the Reader's Digest article, it kind of skipped to Hal Wallace saying, you know, hey, now that the ceasefire's been signed, why don't you go find out about that boy from Texas? Let's go offer him that contract again now. So his assistant went to do it and came back about a day or two later with the telegram from Owen Crump and said he was killed a few days after he went back. Now, everybody believed that. The family, my dad, me. Until I got his morning report in 1994. And those morning reports indicate that he returned from temporary duty early evening of July 6th. That was the night, if you read anything on Pork Chop, the final offensive that the Chinese launched on Pork Chop was the night of July 6th. Ricardo's prayers were answered. They didn't attack till he got back. They launched it on July 6th that night, and at 23:30 he was killed. 12 hours after he filmed his death scene, he was killed for real.
Wow.
Nobody knew that, no one, till 1994, when I got the morning report. And it was on the same day. His real death, R-E-E-L, and then his real death, R-E-A-L, both the same day. The significance of this, we pulled off Pork Chop 4 days later. It was a moral decision. The cost was too high, and it was just an outpost. So to this day, it's in that no man's land in between North and South Korea, but it is technically on the other side of the DMZ. And everyone always says he died for nothing, which really angers me. Now, you mentioned Bill Clinton. You have to understand that at the time I found this story, in the summer of 91, Bill Clinton was already making buzz as the Democratic candidate, most likely going to be for the 92 election.
Right.
What really got me going in the spring of 92 on this story was when people started to say, and to this day, my blood just literally boils, character doesn't count. Hal Wallace in 1959, when he found out that Ricardo had died going back to serve with his squad, wrote, as it washed over me, the significance of this young man's choice and what he had given up more than most. He said, I realized the it, and remember I mentioned that it he always looked for in people. And he said, the it I had seen in this young man that I could not describe, I now knew what it was. It was character. And because he'd been a man of character, his choice had been clear. And that's how he ended the article.
Wow.
And I felt a vibration, a burning, and I knew at that moment, this is why I write. I'd been writing little books, taping them together, table of contents, everything since I was 7. Drove my parents crazy. And I knew this was why. I had also learned to love military history. My dad was a walking dictionary on World War II. He knew every battle on Allied and Axis. He knew every general, Allied and Axis. He knew everything. And in order to spend time with him, I spent every Saturday on the floor in our family room watching Victory at Sea, World at War, all of these things, asking a million questions till he was just practically nuts with it, and not even knowing that I was gaining this incredible knowledge and love of military history. And he almost never talked, though, about his time in Korea. And I remember the first time it dawned on me, wait, just to cease fire? Wait, we're still fighting that war then, aren't we? And he said, yes, we are. And it dawned on me, isn't this war more important? We're still at war. We're still fighting this. And I remember feeling powerfully back then that the day would come, because I prayed about this and studied on it a lot, and I really felt God almost saying to me, prepare your mind now. It's going to be a long journey. Prepare your mind now. Know this stuff, because, Risa, the day is going to come when North Korea is going to be almost daily news again, and they're going to be looking for people who know it. That's also where Islamism came, because around 95, around 94, 95, I started to notice, you had to go back then because the internet wasn't really on. You had to go back then to Idaho State University Library, because we lived in Pocatello, Idaho at the time. And out of Japan, you could get the only authorized state newspaper copies of North Korea. They would put it themselves on their papers. And I started to see all these Pakistani scientists. And I'm going, I know Islam does not like communism. They just got done with the war with Russia. They hate communism. Communism hates any religion. Why are they in the last hardline Stalinist country left on earth? Then I started to notice North Koreans in Pakistan. And I just went, this is the behavior of people who are coming together for something. Then I started to see the name A.Q. Khan a lot. Now, A.Q. Khan, I would come to find out, he's known as I call him the pimp daddy of the nuclear whore. He stole technology from Europe, brought it to Pakistan. That's how Pakistan got the bomb. Then Pakistan made money selling it to any rogue nation, and their first was North Korea, who's turned around and is making money, giving it to Iran, Libya, Egypt, Syria, Saudi Arabia. None of these are our friends, not one. And I started sounding this alarm. I started saying, these guys are creating a secret combination. We are seeing, this isn't Islamofascism. That really pissed me off when they would say that. This is Islamunism, Islam and communism coming together. And everyone laughed. They said, no. Islam hates communism after Afghanistan. Communism hates anything to do with a god. And I said, well, Hitler and Stalin hated each other too. Didn't stop them from a non-aggression pact, now did it. That usually shut them up. But every one of them mocked and ridiculed me until around the year 2000, 2001. Then they would no longer look me in the eye or answer my emails. And I knew why. Because now they were writing about it. And they were quite horrified that for 6 or 7 years they'd really made fun of me for it. And actually this book that led me to start studying that. And I started telling everybody, we've got this secret combination of Islamic nations and communist nations, because I really had a feeling communism was not going to be dead, and it was going to come roaring back, even in Russia. But even if it didn't, the largest nation on earth, 1 billion people, never left communism. China. And China is not our ally. China fully backs North Korea, because North Korea, through North Korea, they can threaten the world. And there is a saying the Koreans use, or that the Chinese would use when they were saying they were going to stick with North Korea. China's the teeth, but North Korea is the lips. Without the lips, the teeth get cold. That is a Chinese saying.
Well,
and they don't hate North Korea for what they're doing, and all their bluster and blow. That's why they never follow through with anything they swear they will. They are supplying North Korea with weapons. They are encouraging it. They are all for it. They are not our friend, and they will not abandon North Korea. They will use them, but they will never abandon them.
So Risa, we're at war. I mean, essentially, and people have a hard time, and I even have a hard time really wrapping my brain around this. But while we're pretending to be, trade buddies with China in some respect, we're actually at war with them by proxy through North Korea.
Right.
And that's that just shows the duplicity. Wow. Wow. Well, okay. So let me ask you this, Risa. I'm sorry. Let me ask you this: what role right now? And I know there's a rich history with the AQCon black market network and such. What role right now is North Korea going to play into our history?
Oh well, I absolutely believe that not only are they supplying missiles as well as the nuclear stuff with Iran and all the enemies of both America and Israel. I believe they are just launching at the bit for an attack on us, and I believe China is going to help them with that. And I don't know how many of your people believe or remember about the missile launch off the coast of LA in November of 2010. That was North Korea. And a lot of people thought China, and I think China probably supplied the sub, because North Korea's been behind on their sub technology a little bit. They're catching up in leaps and bounds thanks to China. But
Rich, hold on a second. I just want to make sure I remember this correctly. Was that the non-missile? Was that the missile that wasn't a missile?
The contrail. That was a 3-stage missile. Please, it had separate stages. I could not believe. And I did an article in which I had 3 generals. I had Paul Valley, I had Thomas McInerney, and James Cash. And all 3 of them were completely against the Pentagon on this, and the president. They said that was a missile. And they were leaning toward China, but when I gave them the reasons, I thought it was North Korea, they went, oh my gosh, you might be right. But I told them I did believe China supplied the sub, and they said that's what convinced them that it was China originally, because the North Korea at the time did not have any sub that could have done that could have launched a missile. They do now, but they couldn't have then. And I said, I'm convinced it was a test. And one of the big reasons is North Korea has a very strong relationship with Cuba. They had just had a ship docked at Cuba. Now, the little sub that could have launched this missile could easily have been in that ship and launched from there, gone through the Gulf of Mexico. And who owns both gates of the Panama Canal? China. China controls both gates. If you remember, that's why we didn't want the Panama Canal out of our control. They're a poor nation, and they just whore it out to anybody who pays the most. And right now, that's been China for like the last 13 years.
Yeah, if I understand this correctly, China set this, or Carter set this up, and Clinton rubber stamped it into existence in '99. Wasn't that the case?
Well, yeah, it's actually Carter that gave it away, but we had been, we can't have China or Russia controlling it, because the Panama is absolutely vital to our Navy. That is the only way we get ships from the Atlantic and Pacific across to each other. Otherwise, they used to have to go down around South America, for crying out freaking loud. That's impossible. We need that lock, and we knew if enemy nations controlled the law of both ends, you could have a problem. And you're right, under Clinton was the first to allow China to not have a problem with China doing it. And I think that was a deal. Because remember all of the Chinese contributors to Clinton, to his campaign. And if you watch FBI reports, it was in about the mid-'90s you started to see overwhelmingly the arrest of all these Chinese at Ford and at Intel and at Microsoft getting arrested for taking secrets. Boeing, I mean, these are places that have, and now where's all of our computer attacks coming from? China. North Korea is doing a lot of them too. I mean, this is exactly what their plan was. They infiltrate, they get jobs here, they steal the technology. All of the technology is stolen. None of it is unique. It's all stolen from us, and all only within the last 20 years, thanks to the Clinton women. Because I'm sorry, Clinton's the biggest walking eunuch out there. Hillary may have balls, but Clinton doesn't.
Yeah, you mentioned in the email communications when we were setting up this interview, one of the things you stated was that China is not our friend. And you're right, but on paper, it would seem as China is our friend, as we are, I just saw a report today, we are sharing now space-based weapon technology with China. We've given them so much of our, we've shipped so many jobs over there. We have the Trans-Pacific Partnership that they're working on. Right. We see people like Henry Kissinger and these globalists say Asia will be the new world power. And they have created it. So.
And of course the currencies too. We're the trade war and the currency war. Oh man.
Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up. That is a huge one. Back in 2003, I actually wrote about it. Both Iran and North Korea openly sought to guide the dollar by refusing. Up until then, the world currency in buying things like oil had been in the American dollar, and they quit. They said, we're not using the dollar anymore. They were going to go with the yuan. And both of them, I'm like, why is Iran going with the yuan? But we know Iran's in league with Russia and China completely. And that was the first time in history, though, that large nations and China eventually joined as well, stopped using American currency. So, yes, they're clearly trying to absolutely destroy the dollar. The American dollar was seen as the most stable. Frankly, I don't know why after it went off the gold standard, but because it's not backed by anything anymore, and you guys cover that all the time very thoroughly. But the fact that large nations now have abandoned it, it's inevitable. And frankly, I'm kind of surprised it hasn't quite happened yet.
Well, it will, I'm sure. But in order of importance, and folks, Risa is well versed, well studied in so many areas, and she's in tune as to what's going on. Fits right in with our audience and our genre, our topical area. We've got China as a threat, North Korea as a threat, but continue on. What's on your radar right now?
Well, right now, one of the reasons I moved to Provo, my youngest had just graduated from high school, and he is a culinary, genius. That little boy, or not a little boy anymore. He's 18, or he just turned 19, and he ended up coming in second when we lived in Washington State in the culinary competition that they had up there for high school students. And he decided, this kid is really good. When he got his eagle, that's all they talked about when they were introducing him. If you ever want to go on a camp out, take Cody with you. You'll eat very well, even if all you bring is crap. Because he truly does have a gift for it. And he joined an after-school culinary group that the high school sponsored. And he just wiped the floor with it his last 2 years there, and that became his love. And he was researching it and decided he wanted to go to Utah Valley University down here, which has a really good culinary school. But the out-of-state was too much, and we couldn't get a waiver, so we were here for a year. And he starts in May for summer school to go to culinary school there. He gets to start there because he'll get in-state tuition then, and then it's affordable. Another reason I wanted to come down is Ricardo's story is so fantastic that I knew everyone I've ever told it to, every group I've ever spoken to, their first words is, this should be a movie. Do you remember, Doug? You're like, that'd make a great movie.
Absolutely.
And I laughed about it. I want it to be. The book is going to be out either later this year or next year. I'm still fielding offers to have it printed. My number one target has always been Mercury Inc. ever since Glenn Beck started it. But getting this story actually to Glenn Beck is tough because, unfortunately, a lot of the people that work around him are quite a bit younger. And unlike Glenn, they may not understand the significance of the Korean War. When I was first telling this story, I would actually have college kids tell me, now Korea, was that in the 1900s or the 18? After I slapped them all, I do not tolerate not knowing history. I don't. My kids know that. Both my boys, the funniest moment ever, they had a friend over, and they were telling them about my story, and they said, Mom, come tell them this part, I don't remember. And I was telling the friends this, and one of their friends, my boys were standing, one on my right, one on my left, and I was telling their friend, and their friend went, I don't remember Korea. Did we learn that in high school? Or was that the Korean-American War where Teddy Roosevelt and my son saw my face, and they both dove behind a couch and the island in our kitchen. And the kid watching, just both of them at the same time, I heard this indraw of gas from my sons because they saw my face, I was ready to get all smacky. And they saw my face and they dove. And the poor kid in front of me was like, uh-oh. And I went, the Korean War we're still fighting, and it was Douglas MacArthur, and he goes, was he president? Okay, that's when I did hit him. Come on, Big Mac! How could you not know that?
Well, and that's the problem with the majority of Americans today. But see, it's right. It's not taught in schools.
No, it's not. NEA. Well, the NEA. I was telling your son about this during our really long conversation. I refused to join the NEA when I graduated. I refused to join the SNEA when I was a student because when they offered it after class one day, I held up the handbook and I said, this is the Communist Manifesto. All it talks about is social programs and people's feelings. There's nothing in here anymore about reading, writing, arithmetic, history, nothing. And she goes, well, what an arrogant thing to say. I said, arrogant? It's your damn job. What's wrong with you? My professors and I did not get along very well at all. there were a lot of arguments and fights because there's no one more liberal and no one more communistic than education and professors of education. And they would roll their eyes when my hand went up or when I would say, no, that is a flat-out lie. None of the other, not one of my fellow classmates would say anything. And then they'd come to me after class, the little eunuchs, talk about political castration, handed their nuts over to PC and never took them back. I mean, eunuchs are creepy. Take your balls back, people. They would come to me after class, and they would say, I agree, in a whisper. And I would say, you agree? As loud as I could. And they would just turn pale and run.
Well, yeah. Why the silence?
I was so angry. The people that tried to sign me up when I graduated were members of my church. Mormons are very ardent against communism. Cleon Skousen, the naked communist, he was Mormon. Yeah, absolutely.
You've got
Ezra Benson was very hard on President Eisenhower, who assigned him as Secretary of Agriculture for being far too accommodating to the communists. Right. He did not admire that at all. He took him to task all the time. And he ended up becoming our prophet later, but he could not stand it. And he wrote about it constantly. And during the Vietnam War, some of his writings at the time just were everywhere on what talk about a prophet. He died back in, when was it, 94? But, and I didn't appreciate him as much back then because when he came in as the president of the Mormon Church, he was very old. And unfortunately, much of the last few years, he was pretty much bedridden, very ill. And you didn't get to see him a lot the last few years at our annual and semi-annual general conferences that we have. And his writings, though, I came to appreciate as I was older because they were downright prophetic. He literally was foretelling what we've been seeing in the last 20, 30 years. And I couldn't believe it because this man knew communism. He knew it because he loved American history. He was a profound studier of it. He adored it. And he was not afraid to take Eisenhower to task for Eisenhower's behavior during his administration. He thought it was a huge mistake not to end the Korean War. And he secretly backed MacArthur. He didn't like the idea of nukes because of the horrible devastation he saw in Japan, but he said, before they get the bomb, we better do something. And, we were too late with Russia. A lot of people don't know this, but the original invasion by the North into South Korea was actually supposed to be in the fall. They upped it to June 25th. Do you know why? Because the week before, the Rosenbergs had been arrested, and we found out how much they'd already given to the Soviets. And Stalin, the Soviets tested their first bomb in September of '49, 5 years ahead of schedule. And that's what led us to go, no, something's wrong here.
Indeed.
Something's wrong.
Reza, we're up against the top of the hour. Stay with us. When we come back, we're going to be talking more about the constant impotence, the clear impotence of the United Nations and the United States in standing up to tyrants. Do we need more examples? Of course we don't, but we're going to give them and give them exactly in current events and why you should be concerned. And of course, Korea, our longest running war, the implications of that, why Kim Jong-un is worse than his father and is speeding up attacks for that part of the world. Folks, you're listening to the Hagmann Report. We're going to be back on track with the time clock, the show clock. Right back up with these messages. Ladies and gentlemen, our sponsor this show is Granlund Firearms of British Columbia. If you're up in British Columbia, stop in Campbell River, British Columbia, the salmon capital of the world. Granlunds will take good care of you. Mention Doug and Joe Hagmann. And if you're not up there, if you're not up in British Columbia, virtually pay them a visit. Pay them a visit on the internet at GranlundFirearms.com. That's GranlundFirearms.com. Check out their gun stock list. Check out their just go to their website. They're constantly adding things to their website. Plus, they've got some beautiful pictures of beautiful British Columbia. It's a great area up there. Folks, you've got to tune into, or you've got to stop in to GranlundFirearms.com. That's GranlundFirearms.com.
Survival of the fittest. In any and all situations, survival is your number one priority. That requires being tough and thinking smart. And the folks at Freeze Dry Guy are going to help you do just that. They have the long-range patrol ration entrees, what they call the Brick Pack. When you're in survival mode, it is absolutely the best item for your survival pack or bug-out bag. You can go farther, faster, and carry more food with the LRP cold weather ration entrees. Not only do these long-lasting, durable entrees help sustain you or your family through the harshest environment or situation, they are by far the most delicious of their kind. No contest. With a variety of tasty entrees, you can't beat the LRP Brick Packs. Let Freeze Dry Guy help you in your survival situations. Go to freezedryguy.com. That's freezedryguy.com. Or call 866-404-3663. That's 866-404-FOOD.
Hi folks, Doug Hagmann here. You might know me as the co-host from the Hagmann and Hagmann Report, or as a frequent guest on Coast to Coast AM with George Norrie. If you're like me, you're tired and confused over today's headlines. You just don't know where to turn for accurate, concise information about really what's going on, what's truly going on in today's society. If you don't know where to turn for accurate, well-researched, and properly vetted news, I've got a suggestion. In fact, it's a requirement. Bookmark Canada Free Press. That's CanadaFreePress.com on the internet. It's just not for Canada. It's for news across the world. Judy McLeod, founding editor, has put together a vast array of talented writers like Kelly O'Connell, Daniel Greenfield, Dr. Eilena Johnson-Powell, a lot of guest columnists, very talented writers. Folks, that's Canada Free Press at CanadaFreePress.com. Now mobile friendly. Follow on Facebook, because without America, there is no free world.
Doug Hagmann. One guy that doesn't need a bullhorn to get your attention.
You want answers. I want the truth. You can't handle the truth.
And welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to our third and final hour of this Friday, February 22nd edition of the Hagmann and Hagmann Report. We are joined by our very special guest, Mrs. Kirkland, Miss Reza Kirkland. I can't read your writing on this paper.
We've only been saying it the whole night. That's all right. That's all right.
I'm sorry about that. Her website.
Switched to decaf today.
AmericansWarChick.blogspot.com. She's also on Facebook and Twitter. And we were talking about many things tonight, including North Korea, what is going on with the U.S. and China, Ricardo's story, and we covered a lot of that in the first hour and second hour, the Islam and communism connections. And I guess where we can go from here.
Well, wait a second. Let me just correct this, folks. If you go to HomelandSecurityUS.com and click on, open up the article that says "Truth is Stranger Than Fiction," and links to her website, Twitter, and Facebook are all on there. But it's America's warchick.blogspot.com. America's War Chick. It's like George Norrie, because whenever I go on Coast to Coast, he always says, it's homelandsecurity.us.com. Well, Doug, welcome. So, sorry about that. That's my. I do tease off air. I do tease George Norrie about that. I said, one of these days you'll get the website right. But anyway, Risa, welcome back.
Thanks. You guys are wonderful. I love this whole relationship thing. I just want to mention, if if Glenn Beck's listening, this book is right up your alley. This is perfect.
Well, we do know one of his researchers does listen to our program, not every night.
Woohoo!
So, look, if you're listening and you know who you are, I promise I'd never mention your name, not even your first name. You know who you are. If you're listening, even if this is by archive, you know where to look. It's on our website. It's americaswarchick.blogspot.com. But just give us a call. We'll hook you up with Risa Kirkland.
That's wonderful. And, yeah, feel free to give out my information. I do all the time. And any prank or dirty phone calls I've gotten, they've lived to regret it. So I don't get those anymore. Plus, I'm getting old, 47 next week. I'm pushing the envelope.
Well, happy
my son's
birthday.
Always mine.
So. Well, you're just a youngster, 46. That's still young. Happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you. Yeah, the best people are born in February. Reagan, Johnson, Washington, Johnny Cash, John Wayne, Glenn Beck, and me.
Of course. Well, okay, now let's get back on track here, because we got really some heavy stuff with the UN, with the U.S., with the whole Southeast Asia corridor there. It's a mess.
It is. And it's like everybody's playing a massive game of let's pretend. Your son and I were talking earlier, and, there was the question, do you think Jong-un is going to be worse? And I said, yeah, because he's younger. He was educated outside of North Korea. That was critical. He had everything he ever wanted. He's spoiled. He has technology, and he has really, in a very short time, advanced their technology there. Even our intelligence people have been quite surprised at how quickly he has advanced it. And that is one of the reasons I keep telling people, I believe with all my heart, we are going to see something from North Korea and along the West Coast. And another one of the reasons I do believe that is that in January of 2003, up in Alaska, they did find missile parts from a Taepodong 2. And one of our intelligence people had made the comment that was 2 years ahead of schedule. That we did not think. Now, our people have since denied it.
Yes.
But Japan's intelligence and South Korea, to this day, they stick with their information. Now, those two are not known for being flighty.
No, and we reported on this, the fact that they found, and we were called liars and fearmongers.
Yes, I have been too. But I've taken them all back. Only in our country did they try to black it out, and then because of the blog and conservative bloggers like you and me, they couldn't totally. So then they said it never happened, it was misinformation. So I went to Japan and South Korea, and to this day they stick with it. They said no, it was found. Frankly, we're baffled as to why they're still denying it, but no. Our intelligence is sound. It was done.
And based on our intelligence, it did land in Sarah Palin's back 40 acres. And I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding about that. But even if it did, people would still be denying it in this country. And that's the fog, the veil that we've got to. We have Benghazi, which we went through. We can't get a lick of truth out of anybody in power about this.
There's that new book out. I would like to look at that, but we can't. We cannot trust anyone in this administration or their butt-licking eunuch friends in the media and Hollywood to tell us a single truth. Not one.
Wow. Yeah, look, we're not going to get to the truth, at least not through the NEPAD media, and certainly nothing from our elected officials. Anyway.
That's what political castration does. It makes you into a gossipy female. And this is why all of my best friends, except for a handful, were almost always guys. I was a tomboy growing up because I learned at a young age, you know, girls will stab you in the back and you won't know for years because they'll act like your friend to your face, and then one day you'll find out all this has been going on for years. That's what I think of when I think of Oho. I call him Oho because it's just a big old black hole. That's not a reference to his color. That's a reference to his brain. Big old black hole. And, you know, people are like, oh, that's racist. Yeah. You know, the first person to cry racism is always the racist because the dictionary definition of it is people who see everything first through race, political, social, economic, even science, everything they see through race. And so I'm always saying first person to bring up race when that is not what you're talking about, always the racist. And it stands to this day. It stands to this day. I was on LinkedIn the other day in a veterans group, no less. The guy that started it ended up banning me. You know why? Because he said, I was glad to see a black man elected president. I went, whoa. Your only standard for being glad at that election was that the man elected his skin color? I said, that's racist. And he ended up banning me. And when I confronted him on it, he said, well, your things you've been posting are a little self-serving. I almost post none of my articles anymore ever because I'm constantly writing and working on the book, which I'm hoping to have out. I was originally hoping to have it out Veterans Week this year. I can still do that. Hint, Glenn Beck, because he would have the ability to do it. A lot of the publishers are saying, no, we better shoot for early next year, Veterans Week this year, because this is the 60th anniversary of the ceasefire, the 60th anniversary of the making of the movie, the 60th anniversary of Ricardo's death, this July 6th, and the 60th anniversary of the release of the movie, which was in November of 1953. I mean, bam, 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 right in a row. We have Memorial Day on. We have all of these opportunities. And so that's one of the reasons I was hoping to do it for this year. But anyway, I'm going, what? I'm always posting articles from other people that I find online that I know that people of a like mind, and that's going to be a lot of them are veterans, are going to post, and it just became these virulent attacks, and I just went, oh, it's a good thing I'm not in there anymore. But I was stunned that people were defending him, and I said, I want you to take that print and show me the negative. You know, when you have a negative, everything that's black in the print is now white, and say, I was glad to see a white man elected. And tell me how the rest of you would react. I never got an answer to that question. That's always a sign of cowardice. They will not answer a direct question with a direct answer.
That's very true. Anytime with this administration, it's all about race. And you know something, Rizzo, as far as I'm concerned, the biggest race baiters are the progressives. They want a civil war. What's your opinion right now? I'm going to go off script here. We didn't talk about this before, but I got to ask you. Okay, we got DHS buying up tons of ammunition, and of course their official line. You know, it's all target practice. We're now seeing these targets of pregnant women and older people like me holding a shotgun. We got the TSA just basically violating every moral, ethical, and constitutional rights we have. What do you see happening here domestically?
This absolutely. We're seeing the classic pattern, or as I call it, the math of history, and that's important because math is an eternal law, unchanging, and it is the basis of all critical thinking, which the NEA stopped teaching in the 60s. Why? Well, look at the pattern of history. Whenever you want to enslave a people, you have to keep them stupid. That's why the slaves were not allowed to learn to read, because we knew they'd eventually read the Constitution. Hey, what's this about all men being created equal? We didn't want that. And so you have to keep the people stupid. Domestically, absolutely. Any time a people that started out righteous has imploded, it's never been from the outside. There has to be the creation of destruction and turmoil on the inside, because no house that's having fighting on the inside can stand up. A house can take a barrage from outside, but if you've got all this turmoil going on inside and then the barrage hits from outside, that house is done. And that's what communism knew. That's what Khrushchev knew when he started heavily infiltrating this nation in the 60s. And he taught his people. Now, you go look at textbooks, movies, magazines, newspapers prior to 1960. He taught his infiltrators this. In America, everybody has equal access to what he called the three commonalities. Education, the first 12 years, and it used to amaze him. It's against the law not to go to school there. Can you believe it? The first 12 years of education. Media, that you said there's a plethora of magazines, newspapers, TV was just coming on strong, TV news. And at least once or twice a week, and this was true back then, people go to the movies, Hollywood. He said those three influence all Americans pretty equally. If we can control them, with education we control the future, with Hollywood we can rewrite history, and with the media we can control the here and now. The thing that's going on right now is an absolutely established mathematical pattern of history. They had to infiltrate here. And what fascinates me is one of the biggest fights that I mentioned about Ezra Benson, the Secretary of Agriculture, he ever had with Eisenhower is when Eisenhower invited Khrushchev here to learn farming techniques, because, you know, the Soviets could never properly feed their people, and it was, the fact that nobody owned property anymore. It was all stolen and given to the state. There was no ambition, no drive, and everyone got the same, whether they worked their butts off and produced, or whether they just showed up, punched in like some union worker, and did nothing. And unions also are very communist, but that's a different topic, but it fits in here. And he said that Khrushchev told him that one day his children and grandchildren would be under communism. And Ezra Benson told him, I will do everything in my power to see to it that does not happen. And he said, and I mean everything. And he said, he knew I meant fighting. And he said, you won't do it under the name communism, but we will do it so little through the Democratic Party and take away the people's rights little at a time, as has been done in history, that they will wake up one day and they will be communists. And he spoke about that all the time. He wrote about it heavily. During Vietnam, he interviewed many men coming home talking about their shock that the American people were told they'd lost. We never lost a battle in Vietnam. We won every single battle. Did anyone out there know that? No.
No, of course not.
Of course not. Because Walter Cronkite is the biggest liar on earth. He was absolutely a communist tool. And I'm not talking about the manly one, because Lord knows that's as flaccid as can be in communism. You got to have balls to make that one work.
Yeah.
And remember that, people. Don't you hand your balls over.
And
don't you give in to political castration. Dang it, we're at war here. Act like you know that.
Before the show, when we were talking, Walter Cronkite came up, and many don't know this, but he was praised for keeping silent about the agenda of the globalists. Right. I think he might even have been given an award. I'm not sure. I don't know if it was the Council on Foreign Relations who made that statement. It was David Rockefeller who made the statement at one of those meetings that they have. But they said, we owe a lot to Mr. Cronkite for keeping our agenda secret, for if it was revealed to the public, they would, fight against it. So thank you for keeping it private for us as we continue to implement it.
Something about that. I know when he died, I remember saying, I better never find out where he's buried, because they'll be lucky if all I do is piss on his grave. I see red when I hear the name Walter Cronkite, and I mean that in more than just communism, that this man lied all during the Vietnam War, and nobody called him on it. And the fact that General Giap of the North Vietnamese Army was ready, he was filling out how he was going to unconditionally surrender because we won at Tet. He was so decimated at Tet, he was about to surrender when one of his men came running in, his face pale, and said, "You're not going to believe this." And they were listening to the Armed Forces radio, and Cronkite was on there. Remember the absolute makes me grit my teeth and break a tooth or two every time when I hear that, the most trusted man in America. What a load of crap. And that's what I would do on his grave if I could, because you know, do it, you're gonna get it. But no, get this. He heard Cronkite telling him they'd lost at Tet, the war was lost. He ripped up his unconditional surrender papers, told his people if they could hold on 5 minutes longer than America, they would win and beat the American giant for the first time, because he said, we now have help in their own country. And in 1984, when Giap wrote his book, he thanked Cronkite in it. An enemy of America thanked Walter Cronkite for helping them beat us.
Yeah, that should tell the tale. I mean, anyone who would, it's just like Sirhan. I digress. But yeah, I mean, look, and I would urge everyone, if you have, or if you haven't heard of this YouTube series, it's called Evidence of Revision. It's a lengthy series. I think there's probably 16 hours worth of footage, but it's actual footage from the, I think it goes from I don't know, 1960 forward. And it gives you real news of footage, but you can actually see the progression of events. And I've got nothing to do with the series, but to show you how despicable and how incrementally the media was infiltrated by communists since the 50s. Well, even perhaps earlier than that, but really during the 50s. It's crazy, and now everything has been just infiltrated. And I think you had mentioned The Naked Communist by Skousen.
Right.
I got to tell you, everyone should read that book. And I'm not.
Oh my gosh, yes.
The Tragedy and Hope, Carol Quigley, Professor Carol Quigley's book. It's a encyclopedic book. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but that kind of lays out the framework for the communistic takeover and the global governance takeover of the United States. So, and they're bragging about this in this book, and so it's an incredible story. But so at this point, though, I mean, now I'm curious about this, because you've got what's been your experience with the National Education Association, NEA?
Oh dear Lord, they are fully communist, and I'll actually tell you why. Studying the Korean War as I did, the first time the term brainwashing was ever used was when our POWs came back. And here's why. Stalin, in the 1930s, wanted his scientists, your son and I were talking about this earlier, he wanted the scientists to show him a way he could control the masses without drugging or having to kill them all, which he was fine with the Gulag system and everything, and imprison them all. Because they also needed, slaves. And yes, they used the people in Gulags a lot as slaves, but starving, half-beaten men were not the best slaves there were. He needed them among the general population. And his scientists said there's actually a physiology to the psychology that you could use, and you can get the masses to do whatever you want. And he went, oh, what? Now, I want you to think of this in terms, everybody I know says the 60s on were when we saw the blatant and flagrant attack and downfall of this country. I want you to keep that in mind with what I'm going to tell you. Those scientists told him that an overwhelming emotional response in a human temporarily disarms the logic center of the brain. Now, it's based on the flight or fight principle, If you're in fear for your life, an animal will take great risks running that maybe he wouldn't take in a state of logic. Or he will fight, with incredible power that not even he can believe, that he probably would never attempt to do in a state of logic. But you can corrupt and pervert that, Stalin was told. If you keep people in an emotional state at all times, you keep logic turned off. And the logic center of the brain is where truth resides. That's where people keep going, to that center, when they're confused by something and they're trying to figure it out and get to the bottom of it and get to the truth. And as an example, they gave this example. They said if a woman walks in and the man in there is her husband, her father, her brother, her son, the woman walks in, she's beaten up, and she says, "I've just been raped." The universal reaction of every single man on earth, no matter where they were raised, righteous or wicked, is going to be that first flood of emotion, and they're going to say, "I'm going to find that SOB and I'm going to kill him." Now, he said, here's the problem. The scientist told him, eventually, that emotion is made to eventually subside. When that happens, logic returns. And the man will say, let's take you to the hospital, let's call the police, and let's get this taken care of. But they said, you keep that man in a state of emotion, he will find that SOB and kill him. A good man who would normally never even consider such a thing. And the difference is logic was not allowed to return. And they said, you keep these people emotionally driven, and you can get them to do what they would never do in a state of logic. Now bring us back to the 60s. 60s were nothing but raw emotion. Nothing. There was an absence of logic and truth. That's why the destruction began with the NEA of the Constitution. That's why it went more from focusing on truth, reading, writing, arithmetic, history, to feelings and emotions and all that little pussy crap you just want to smack until everyone's dead. Or that's just how I feel, maybe. I don't know. They started to switch it. Why? Because everybody has emotions, and they can be played with. Now, in communism, the favorite emotion was fear, and it worked very effectively, and we're seeing it more today. How many people are afraid to say things on TV? Did you ever think you'd live in a day when people would be afraid of a word or look side to side before saying a word like, nigger? It's just a damn word, people! And it actually, by the way, has legitimate roots. It came from the river Niger, which used to be spelled Nigre under the old English spelling. And in the South, when they would listen, I actually was taught this by a black woman who came to ISU and spoke about the genesis of the word changes among the blacks. Negro, nigger, colored, black, African American.
But wait a second. Now hold on a second though. But you understand? I'll tell you, I don't agree with that because I understand that there are things that we've been set up for. I mean, we've been set up, but to use such a just such a derogatory term
like that. I've got to tell you the background on it, and it was never ever meant to be that. It actually didn't become that until the KKK started using it derogatorily, started by Democrats, by the way. The KKK was never supported by Republicans, all Democrats. This woman said back then, and this is actually true, my dad's family is all from the Deep South.
Right.
And this is how endemic it is in education. Most conservatives even say this. And that's why I call myself broad, dame, and chick. Get over it, women. Who cares? Monosyllabic words do not beat our butts. I always say it because it just makes my day to see a Femi's head explode. It's just awesome. But anyway, you use that word, and they will spend the next hour on that word. That's called a distraction tactic, if you know anything about the military. Distract, divert, evade, deny, lie, stall, attack. And those are the tactics of Islamism and political castration. You never focus on anything real. Remember the debate. He never answered a direct question. It was always distract, divert, stall, evade, deny, lie, attack. Every single question. That's why he never won a single debate. But anyway, she got up and she was actually saying that the word was originally Niger. Now you have to understand that when the slaves were being sold, and the slave trade, by the way, in Africa started by Muslims, and the Africans actually would keep one another as slaves in their tribes, and they would sell them to the Muslims and then eventually to traders from Europe and then from America. And anyway, she got up and said, now the word N-I-G-R-E with the original English spelling, in the South, when they would put up the posters for slaves, they would put up things like fresh from the river Niger, because that's the river they would go up. And the Southerners, who pronounce things phonetically, would call it Nigra. Now, my dad's family was Deep South, and I'll never forget, he almost had a heart attack laughing. My dad would never use the word ever, nigger, nigra, anything. It was forbidden in our house. That's one of the reasons he left the South. Much about the South he loved. He hated that, but every family was fine with it. He could never understand that because it goes against our beliefs. But they were fine. They were raised with it, and it just didn't bother to question. He left. He left the South for that reason, which broke his heart. There's a lot he loved about the South. But when his family came to visit, he would always warn us, you know, they're only going to be here for a week. They will use that word. I don't want you yelling or screaming or having a fit, because that's what we usually did if anybody used it, because we knew how our dad felt about it. He couldn't stand it. And I actually have an article after my dad died that really explains this in quite a bit of detail, called What a Daughter Learned, What a Father Taught, if you want to go find it. It got quite a bit of play, but it's quite a long one. And anyway, he told me, he said, you know, they will say that word. That's just how they are. I don't like it, but they're my family. I do love them, and I expect you to show them respect. Well, I was like maybe 6 when they visited us in northern Idaho at the time, when my dad was in charge of the Job Corps up there. And they came in with their southern, I could never understand them. I had the hardest time understanding them when they talked. But they kept saying nigra, 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 nigra. And I finally pulled my dad over and I said, Dad, they're saying nigger wrong. And he about fell over. They all dropped to the floor and laughed, because it took them several years to forgive my dad for marrying a Yankee when he married my mom. And I'll never forget my Uncle Ed, my dad's brother, saying, Robert, this is what you get for marrying a Yankee and raising your kids in Idaho. And they just laughed their butts off. But my dad said, actually, that's how they pronounced it back then, Reese. It had to do with the river. Well, this woman actually filled in the blanks years later when I was watching her speak. She said the Southerners would pronounce that river Nigra, and that's actually where the term came from, N-I-G-R-E, Nigra. It was never derogatory. The posters said that's where they were from. You've got to understand, they were not very well educated back then, and that's how it was done. Now, she said with the Southern drawl and the laziness of the drawl, it eventually kind of became nigger. But she said the actual words nigga was done more by the blacks, who were not allowed to be educated. They were not allowed to be educated.
So tell me, I mean, I'm not sure I quite understand the connection between the use of a pretty pejorative term by today's standards.
That actually stunned me, and here's why. When Obama was running. If you remember, everyone had already said Clinton was the nominee. I even remember a Saturday Night Live sketch on it where all these people showed up for the debate, and there were the Democratic Party leaders saying, "Thanks for showing up, everyone. We're going with Hillary." And this was like in the fall of 2007. And they're all going, "But we're running for president too." "Right, but we're going with Hillary." And it was just this really funny skit. Now, at the time, Obama hadn't even announced he was running. In fact, he was saying he wasn't going to. But then that spring, out of the blue, he said he was going to. And everyone was stunned. I had been saying, America fears words now. Khrushchev's prediction came true. And because that's been so pounded into our head by media, the three commonalities, education and Hollywood, everyone is so afraid of being called sexist, they will elect Hillary for that. When the first time I saw Obama get up and announce, I turned to my family and said, Americans are more afraid of the word racist than sexist. He's going to get it.
Yeah, there's an element of political correctness that people think they need to...
Castration. Don't ever call it correct. It is not correct. That is a huge sticking point with me. It's political castration. Do you know why? Because Khrushchev actually said these words, if we can render America impotent, we can beat them. Because I was looking for a word to replace correct in my writings, and I found it. And I went impotent, castration. That's what he was trying to do. He was trying to castrate America to make us impotent. Political castration. And that's how it was born. And I was actually using it back in 97, but I didn't start putting it into my writings, I think, till about 2004, because my husband, my ex-husband and my dad found it offensive. What a rude word. The minute I started using it, I was getting letters from well-established journalists and historians. They just went nuts for it. They fell in love with it. And I'm like, I can't believe no one's ever thought of this word before. But I found out how little people understood about history and the plan that Khrushchev enacted. And that is also why you hear everybody call us a democracy now, because Khrushchev had said back when he was teaching his spies to infiltrate, don't call America a republic in education, media, or Hollywood. Call them a democracy, because the more easily led of the Americans with the word republic, that's going to incline them to vote Republican. So if you call it a democracy, it'll work in our favor. They will go to the left, and they will vote Democrat, which is what we want, because that was the party they had infiltrated heavily. And that is why now you hear us constantly referred to by journalists, by everybody, teachers, as a democracy. But prior to 1960, every article, every movie, every textbook, you never saw the word democracy except, they were considering these forms of government. And it's always republic. I actually almost got into a fight with my oldest son's high school teacher, who marked him wrong on a test because he had put republic instead of democracy. And I brought my Constitution, asked her to show me where it was, and she pulled out her NEA handbook, and I stopped her and said, I have a degree in education, that's your problem. That's a lie. Why would they print it? Because they want to lie to you. I didn't feel like I was being vague. And I showed it to her, and I could see it really bothered me. She goes, no, they say right here that America is a democracy. And I said, and you're going to believe them over the law of our land, the Constitution. And right. I never got an answer to that.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, the replacement of words do mean things, as Limbaugh has said before. The replacement of a constitutional republic with democracy.
Right. Words do mean things, but you've got to remember, too, words only have the power you give them, and they removed the power from republic. They gave it to democracy. And as your son and I were saying earlier, even on news stations like Fox, you see them talk about we're a democracy. I almost flip my lid every time I hear that. My sons run My son, the other day, my son went, I'm making sure there's nothing near you. They're talking politics, and you're going to throw something at the TV again because they're going to use the word democracy. You and I know it. I didn't even realize how much I had done that. But my sons actually told me both. Do you know, Mom, I'm the only kid in my history class that knew we were a republic. Even the teacher said democracy, and I said, no, we're a representative republic. And he said, I almost got into trouble until one of the other teachers had come in to ask him a question, heard what was going on, whispered to him, and I saw him nod and go, well, okay, we are, but, you know, we're a democracy too. And my son went, we are? Because they left that out of the Constitution, if we are. But he was the only one, even over his teacher, that knew that. And the teacher was getting mad at him. You guys, to homeschool your kids. There are a lot of charter schools. One of the things I love about Utah, they have started a lot of charter school. The Timber Academies have started. Glenn Timber is the son-in-law of Cleon Skousen and has carried on his work a great deal. And he started these academies of education the way it was in the beginning. You know, they taught the Bible because it was a book everyone had, but they taught it also because it had foundational laws, morality, on which all societies had thrived and done well. And they wanted that taught in school. And he teaches it with that kind of a bent. It has to be very constitutional.
Yeah. And look, I mean, the Communist Party goals that were read into the Congressional Record in '63: get control of our schools, use them as transmission belts for socialism and current communist propaganda, soften the curriculum, get control of teachers' associations. Again, NEA, put party line in textbooks, and this all started in the '50s. So this is how much has changed, and now many children are just carted off in buses all over town because of busing. Yeah. You know, the schools are centralized, and once again, you get them centralized, you get them a captured audience, and we've got.
Yeah, and our Constitution, they wanted education to be very local, with the final word being the parent. That is why we never had a Department of Education until that bane of our existence, Carter. In fact, that's what got Reagan elected. His goal was to get rid of the Department of Education in his 1980 campaign, and it was his biggest disappointment when he left office that he had not been able to do that. It is not meant to be federalized. It is meant to be very localized. And you know why he started it? The Right to Work Act had started in the 70s. Teachers, a lot of them were no longer joining the NEA, and because they lived in right to work states, which were being passed, they didn't have to. The NEA pressured Carter, didn't take much, you know, with a eunuch, and he totally caved. Created the Department of Education, which meant it didn't matter now. Federal trump state, remember that lie? And they said, since education is now federalized, it doesn't matter if you live in a right-to-work state. We went round and round about that because Idaho was right to work, and at the time I lived in Idaho and graduated from Idaho State University. And I refused to join the NEA, and they told me you won't be able to work, and I went, nope, it's local, and they said, nope, it's federal since the creation of the Department of Education, 12 years ago. And we're right. They were right. If you don't join the NEA, you can't teach. And I said, well, I can teach my kids, and what I'm going to do every day after school is undo the crap you're teaching them, and I did. They had to spend an hour every day after school with me, telling me what they were taught so I could undo it.
Well, I think most children, most students, whether they're in elementary school or secondary, high school, that is, have been. A lot of this, by the way, a lot of the language, a lot of the the curriculum. I'll just call it the curriculum. A lot of it is under, I don't want to say under the oversight, but has been influenced through, for example, the United Nations.
Definitely.
And people don't get that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And where we cave to the United Nations, places like Japan. Look at the algebra, for example. Pick up a Japanese 10th or 11th grade equivalency algebra book and look at ours. It's
try to figure it out. Yeah, I don't even remember being that advanced in college algebra. I mean,
exactly.
Man.
Exactly, and we've allowed the communist takeover. And
yes.
you know, the naked truth. By the way, you spoke of the naked truth by Bowers.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
That has a lot of. It's actually the Naked Communist Revisited with James C. Bowers. It's available, I believe, on Amazon. But that book goes into all of the goals that we're talking about here, all the communist goals.
Mm-hmm.
And are we not seeing through communism and through the morphing of Islam and communism? Unlikely allies as they are, but they are. Are we not seeing? Are we not seeing the setup for one world governance here?
Well, when Hitler and Stalin made the non-aggression pact, no one paid attention. Were we seeing the setup then? Yep. Now here's the interesting thing, though. Both Stalin and Hitler hated each other. They both had secret plans to turn on the other when they felt strong enough. Hitler beat Stalin to it. Now bring that forward to today. Islam and communism inherently hate one another, which means what? They've got to be having plans, and I absolutely believe they do, to turn on the other when they feel strong enough. Now, I believe Islam will turn first, but communism is fully in societies. They have standing armies and nations, whereas these guys usually go around to mosques and they get little groups. Now, I've always said Pakistan was never our friend. People were stunned when bin Laden was found in there, and I've been writing about it back in 2004. We'll find bin Laden most likely in Pakistan. It's right there by Afghanistan. Of course they are. They're very friendly to terrorists. Look at Khan. Look at the people they've supplied, and we've never done crap about it. But I believe communism in the end is our oldest enemy. Islam is the really ugly bearded face. I mean ugly. Damn, they were hit with the ugly stick by God and then beaten to death with it. But they absolutely will turn first, but it will be communism that wins the day. They're fully institutionalized. They have million-man armies at their beck and call, and in China, then some. And they can call them up all the time. They are not just a bunch of guys at mosques getting, disenfranchised, militant young men raised on hate and hoping they'll join and put on a suicide vest. These guys in the communist countries have no choice. They're raised in it. You have to do military service, and they do. They do the military service. But here's one of the things I want to throw out to your people. Back in 2005, I was contacted by a young Muslim man who was in Europe at the time going to school. He had left Islam, but he had not let anyone know. And he'd actually left it because he'd had a Jewish lab partner when he was in undergraduate school in one of the countries over there. And this young man was really nice. He liked him. He was smart. They got along really well. And he said that suddenly my Islamic friends that had served in the military with me back in the nation he'd come from and had been my friends all my life, they started to torture and harass me. And I went, well, I was assigned this guy, first of all, but he's nice. What's wrong with you? And he said, I sat down and went, this Jewish guy that I was taught came from apes and pigs is human and decent and wonderful to me. And these Islamic guys, which are supposed to be God's jewel or Allah's jewel, are now turning on me and torturing me. And he went, my gosh, I've been totally deceived. Well, he had attended the A.Q. Khan school for a brief time. And he had met him one time. And he actually said to me, I need to know something, Risa. Do you know what MTBF is? And I said, no. He said, it means mean time between fracture. Now, this young man was going to school to become an engineer, don't they all? He's extremely intelligent, a very nice man, and still a friend. He said, why do you guys let enemy nations make your parts? And I went, what? And he goes, I've seen this, and I actually wrote about this in an article. He said, for many years, enemy nations of yours like China, and Muslim nations would make your parts and they would do a good job. But we were taught that the day would come when we would mess with MTBF and you would have no idea. And he said what we were told to do is to make a part that may have a mean time between fracture, that is how long it'll last before it starts to fracture and needs to be replaced, of say 1,000 hours, but we would mark it with an MTBF of 2,000 hours. Meaning you guys wouldn't even get halfway through before it'd start to fracture. Now, I want you to think back. This young man worked on the Airbus during graduate school, and he said everyone here is Muslim and Chinese. Have you noticed how many brand new Airbuses have, I mean, we're talking new.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Look, this is, yeah, we were told, and Risa, we were told, in fact, there are government documents that we have seen that have proved this out, where there is this whether it's the Airbus from China, the parts from China, look, this has been a long time in the works, and people have to understand this because it's so important.
It's from a country that did it, and they were taught it.
So yeah.
Oh my gosh! And then but that brings me to my point. When I said I've been suspicious of that ever since I started to see labels made in China, made in Pakistan, made in Afghanistan, wherever. And I said, why aren't we doing anything? And he said, and this brings me back around to the whole thing I gave you with us being so afraid of being labeled racist that we would rather die in a fiery crash than be called a racist. He said, because those nations are dark, Risa, and you guys are terrified of being accused of being racist. Bam. You and your leaders are so afraid of Islamophobe or nigger or any word that all someone has to do is hint. Is this racism? Is this a law? You guys will fold instantly, and he's right.
Well, look, and I'll say this, okay? I'm deeply, deeply offended by the pejorative nature of any characterization of any race. Okay. Now,
offended, but the fact of the matter is, he said we're taught to use that, Risa. We are taught to cry racism, Islamophobe. Look at Jesse Jackson. He drops that left and right. You think that's an accident? He said.
But Jesse Jackson, Jesse Jackson does not represent. I mean, Jesse Jackson is the antithesis of
exactly. But he held people. He held them ransom until about the mid-'90s when everything seemed to fall apart for him. But he did for over 20 years. By the way, Coretta Scott King hated him. And she had told Martin to never trust him because when Martin died, he held Martin, got the blood on his clothes, and ran up to a reporter. She never forgave him for that. She never trusted him. But this young man from another country said he was told if you're ever confronted, accuse them of racism because you're dark or foreign, or Islamophobia because you're after 9/11. That became the big one. But up until then, he said it was racism, and we were taught that. We were taught to use that, and he said, and we were taught that by a lot of the liberal leaders from your country, many of them female and black, who had seen the power that accusation had to get them what they wanted. And that's why I say you've got to stop being controlled by words. Fine. They're foul words. You hear the F word every single day. Nobody craps a brick over that. You better learn to handle
Yeah, but it doesn't make it right. Well, look, I mean, to me, wait a second. I'm going to mute you here in a second, because to me, anybody who substitutes words like the N word or the F word or, I mean, for the love of Pete, I got to tell you something. To me, they lack the intellectual capacity and the vocabulary. No. I'm telling you right now.
I get
put her,
that.
Mute her. This is our program. I'm going to tell you something. I don't put up with racist crap. All right? Now, I listened to about an hour of this. All right? Now, Risa, I'll tell you, I was with you for the first hour. I think you had a great thing going. But when you throw stuff like this into the program, I can't back this.
No, Doug, I'm not saying I use it either. I was raised not to. But what I'm saying is, by talking to people like this, I've realized there was an agenda behind making certain words illegal and making certain words so that if you used them, you could lose your job, your business, and even your freedom. We either mean freedom of speech or we don't. And that is my point, and that was this young Muslim's point, is that you guys have got to stop being so afraid of being accused to be that. No, I don't support it. It's not allowed in my house, and it never was, not even by my Southern dad. But my point is, there is overwhelming evidence that is what the other side is using to quiet us and keep us. It's the fear of that word, of being accused of being one of the ists, racist, sexist, whatever. Right. And when this young Muslim guy told me that, he said, because, Risa, we're brown. And you guys are terrified of that. And I went, we're not afraid of brown. What are you I didn't even get what he was making. And that's when he said, no. You're afraid of being accused of being racist. That's why you won't say it.
All right. Well, Risa, look, I appreciate your time on the program. We are up against the bottom of the close of the show, and I want to thank you very much for your appearance tonight.
Can I end on a more positive note? Because I don't want people thinking that, Ricardo came from Mexican-American parents, and I've been after his story for 20 years now. It is a fantastic story, but that's my point. There was a time in this country when it really didn't matter. And that should be what matters now, the integrity, the character, what people give and give up for freedom. Right. That's what should matter. And that's what this young Muslim man was trying to tell me. You've got to start taking a stand. That's what Ricardo's story was. There's a right and a wrong. And he stood for right. And we should again, too.
Well, indeed we will. Risa, we're up against the close of the program. God bless you. Our prayers will be with you that the story of Ricardo gets out. God bless you.
AmericansWarChick.blogspot.com.
Right on. Risa,
thank you so much, Hagmann.
Thank you. All right. God bless you, my friend. All right, folks. Next week we've got a fabulous lineup. Next week we've got Dr. Judy Wood coming on, and
on the 26th. Yep.
That's next week. I just want to say thank you, everyone, for tonight, for hanging with us
for the whole week.
For the whole week. It was a trying week, I got to tell you, and I just can't wait to see my inbox tonight. So.
Yeah, God bless each and every one of you. Hopefully see you back on Monday. We'll be revamped, ready to go. And L.A. Marzulli's coming on also. And a few other people were lining up, Pastor Paul Begley and a few others. Have a great weekend, and see you next week.